after 9/11, there was like this hiatus. Like SNL paused their show for like 18 days. A whole bunch of comedy shows just like stopped. They're like, it's not the time to be funny. It's like my biggest pet peeve is the moment I have like any level of like serious discussion that involve like fifis. People are like, oh, well, you're going to the therapist mode. And I'm like, no, bro. And this is where probably we disagree. I'm okay with men wearing very subtle amounts of makeup for...
That's where we... No. Okay.
I want people to understand that there's a pretty big difference between having a career in streaming and having a job. Like the Tradcon kind of weird movement.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's a movement that is unironically celebrating men at their worst.
And white women are especially the biggest peddlers.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. And I don't know why. And some people are like, yo, Adam, you got a prejudice against... I do.
There's this study that they did in developmental psych as well, where they had a storybook with basically animal characters. And basically they would tell the parent that it was a boy or a girl main character. It's actually really interesting. So I don't know, you probably don't know anything about me, but so a lot of people, I feel like I would be more of an ab orbiter than a destiny orbiter, to be honest, because I've been watching your guys' content for like 2.5 years. I didn't even start watching Destiny until last December because my husband wanted me to. So yeah, I've been... So the reason why he wanted me to start watching your content is because he said that I was woefully unaware of men and dating and how like men think about relationships and women. And so I was like, just watch these. And it was enlightening for sure.
Yeah. What were some of the earlier things that you remember that you're like, oh, I didn't know guys thought about these things? Yeah,
just like first of all, every time you would predict about like which girl they would pick, I'd be like, no, it's got to be this girl. So realizing, first of all, my view of like attraction for women seems to be wholly different than it is for men. Because like every woman you'd point at, be like, she's gonna be the one that the guy goes for. I'm like, she's like kind of cute. Like I knew the basics, like guys are into physical attractiveness, blah blah blah. But I think I assumed that it was what I find attractive, not what men find attractive, right? Which is often a lot more of like softer features and emphasis on like booba and bum, where I placed a lot more emphasis on like highly angular faces and stuff like that.
Did you just call it booba and bum?
Yeah.
Okay, I've never heard that before.
Oh,
interesting.
Well, you can have it if you want.
Yeah, I mean that's some basic stuff, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of emphasis on ass and titties for sure.
Yeah, and now so a couple of my friends that were in the dating scene at the time, they were absolutely just moronic in how they thought about like what men were looking for and like what men to even look for, and they always just dated like the worst guys who were just like the quintessential like fuckboy loser asshole. And so I actually assigned them homework to just watch you guys reacting to Jubilee, and it was helpful. And she was like, "This is actually kind of helpful," and I was like, "I know."
Yeah, did they stop bringing up astrology?
She was well, they're Christian, so they're into Christian versions of astrology. Have you ever heard of Enneagram?
No, I actually don't know any of that stuff. No.
Okay, well, Enneagram is like the Christian version of astrology.
Okay, yeah, we're not trying to hear that either.
You don't want to hear anything about it?
I'm sure if it's like if they meet people through church, I think they probably would be more open. I feel like with religious people, that's probably their best bet in terms of meeting partners through their own background. No,
men at church are. It's rough. It is rough. So there's like a couple things that go on in Christian land, which is number one, dating is like, if you go for coffee with somebody, people assume you're getting married. So it's like even asking somebody out for coffee is like a really big commitment. And a lot of the men are just like a lot of men's groups in Protestant land, they just sit together and they talk about how they're bad people for masturbating. Every single men's group. And then women's group talk about how like they should probably be more modest. And so then unsurprisingly, they just avoid the opposite sex like the plague. They just never date until finally they do date somebody and then they immediately marry the one guy. But like, I definitely was looking outside of the church when I was a young Christian lady because a lot of
how deep in your faith are you?
I would say pretty deep, especially when I was single. I was probably way more standard like religious. I still have like a really strong faith. It's just I like to say I'm the Christian that no Christian would own typically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. Whenever I meet like super religious people and they date somebody who's outside of their faith, I look at them a little bit funny.
Yes. So I looked for outside of my church, but still like open to Christianity. And I definitely was, I mean, I lucked out. I found a guy who like, is also has similar faith and also has a similar style of faith. Cause my struggle was as I was like getting more into like science and evolution and like researching stuff, I was realizing that a lot of my core tenets of my faith, like were either needed to shift or I needed to like walk away from my faith basically.
So you needed somebody who was religious but still open-minded to not be
Yes.
super fixated on. Okay, that's fair.
Yes.
Well, I mean, at least that's a good medium. I find it weird when someone's like hyper religious and their partner isn't at all. I'm just like, I feel like this is a terrible basis for our marriage. But hey,
because there's a tension the entire time, right? Assuming it's usually she's the Christian, she's hoping that he will become saved, and in her mind, he's going to hell. And the entire time, he's like, I don't believe in this shit. I'm not interested. It's like you're inherently putting a conflict into your relationship.
Yeah. I actually had somebody who was trying to date me for some time, and it was so funny because I'd ask her questions about her faith, just out of curiosity. I have zero interest in being religious myself, but I take an interest. And she said something that was so wild. I remember her saying like, well, me being not religious, like, what do you think that does for us? And all of a sudden, she confesses to me that like, yeah, the fact that you're not saved really troubles me. And I was like, why? And she says, because I know you're going to burn in hell for all eternity, and that keeps me up at night. And I was like, well, that's wild. Like, that's such a wild thing to say. But that's how she really
That's
felt.
how
Like,
they feel.
She was afraid. She's like, there's still time. And I started asking, I'm like, what about the people who are like living in the Amazon and have never heard of the word of God? Like, are they going to, she's like, yeah, they're going to burn in hell too. I'm like, but they never even heard about it. Like, Jesus didn't even send him a letter. And I, we started having like conversations like that. But it was just, I didn't go on dates with her after that. But it was just weird thinking about dating somebody who's like convinced you're going to burn for all eternity.
Yeah, exactly. There's literally an inherent tension. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I definitely like, there's a couple of guys I know that are so Tradcon and not religious where I'm like, just become religious. Like you'll literally find your like ideal wife at church. But there's not a lot of men in church, and the men that do stay tend to be really rigid and dogmatic and not overly socially skilled. Yeah. So, yeah. How do you feel? I think you won the Orbiter Wars. I think you came out the official champion.
I'm not gonna lie, that stuff sounds super corny to me. I think it's very weird that the subreddit obsesses over like who's the best orbiter, this stuff. But that's their community, so I just let it go. But I really don't care.
No. Do you like the subreddit?
From the few times I have been, I go check. It seems like they have a cool sense of humor, and they're hypercritical about different things. So I mean, as far as community goes, it doesn't seem terrible to me, so that's good. Yeah. But I don't know about it to say if it's good.
Because you just discovered what Reddit is like 2 days ago or whatever.
I mean, I've known what Reddit is. I just haven't spent much time. Sometimes if I have like a query about whether or not something works or if a video game is good, I'll Google the game and I'll click review and then I'll put Reddit and I'll just read a bunch of the comments because I find those are probably more rewarding than going to read an actual video game review. Because you get like a variety of perspectives. But yeah, I don't spend time. I don't like do much on Reddit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, part of what I wanted to ask you about today was so I wanted to start with comedy. I've been wrestling a lot with the concepts of comedy, of basically like, can comedy ever go too far? And I know that you have a history in doing stand-up comedy. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
What rules? What do you want to know? What are these boundaries that you're trying to parse out?
What boundaries are there in your mind?
I mean, absolutely. Even comedians will tell you there's boundaries because comedians know that there are specific kind of comedy shows. So like we have dark humor comedy shows, and comedians who do like extremely dark humor do not go to regular comedy clubs and do shows on the weekend. Why? Because they understand there's a place and time for everything. Same thing with certain types of jokes. Like listen. Whether people admit this or not, comedy is very segregated in terms of how they curate their comedy clubs and what comedians they hire. So are there rules? I think most comedians would absolutely tell you there's rules. They just don't like people on the outside imposing that on them. But there's definitely rules that like even comics know to live by for sure.
So at different clubs then, are there different rules as a comic you need to like be aware of? Like at this club, we don't make these types of jokes or anything?
There are some comedy clubs who are really lame and have a tremendous amount of rules. Um, Up until recently, there was a bunch of comedy clubs that wouldn't allow for like multiple women on a lineup or multiple minorities on a lineup. And these are not like official rules; these are unofficial rules that comedians know about. You'll even talk to comedy club owners, and they'll tell you this in private, right? So, because they don't want the night to turn into an urban night, quote unquote, which is funny because like you don't hear the night
That's
turn
crazy.
into
That's
urban.
crazy.
But this is not abnormal what I'm saying. These are
Yeah.
facts. But at the same time, there are urban comedy nights where it's just black comedians. So there's the other side of that. So as far as there being structure and where you can do certain things, absolutely that does exist. Yeah.
That seems like that seems so like early 2000s almost to have like to be calling it that if there's like multiple minorities or women calling that like a special type of night. Like it's like having like exotic night and you just have like women and like black people on stage is like kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, but if you think about it, we all have that subconscious bias. If you if you go into a comedy club and you saw a lineup of 5 people and they were all women, you would think, is it like a lot of people would think, oh, is it like a female night? Is this like a special night? And most people have that reaction to seeing those things. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I just think we all have that inside of ourselves to some degree.
I'm trying to think if that is the case. I feel like as somebody, I don't go to comedy clubs like almost ever. I feel like I probably wouldn't have that thought at all. But that's probably because I'm not used to it. And I'm like, I would just be like, oh yeah, there's 5 women on stage. Like I wouldn't really think of it, but I can imagine that if you're used to going to comedy clubs and you're used to seeing like mostly just white men, that you can maybe think that way.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like,
so what are some of the other questions that you have in regards to like comedy and its rules? Like what is your concern? I feel like this is coming from somewhere.
I don't know. Well, I don't know much about concern. I wouldn't say that I'm like an overly funny person. And so it's not a concern. I get people asking me this a lot about like what jokes are okay, when are they okay? You know, when this conversation comes up a lot with Sneeko, especially like when he makes certain jokes, whether you find them funny or not, are they okay or are they not okay? And it's really hard to like for me, the line feels like if the joke doesn't land and it's edgy, now it's not okay too, because it's like you can take a risk with an edgy joke, and if it lands, you're golden.
I disagree with that, but I think even as comedians, we know that there's a difference between us being on a news show and there's a difference between us being at a comedy club. So comedians know this, right? And so even the edgiest comedian that you know, when they're on a YouTube live stream, are not going to be the exact same as when you catch them live in person at a comedy show, because they know the context of that area is different. And so as far as being online and wanting to make jokes, I'm very flexible with most people, whether the joke is funny or not. I think the joke being funny or not is irrelevant because because funny is one, subjective, and two, funny and unfunny jokes, as Patrice would say, come from the same place. Like when you're doing a joke, you don't know if it's going to land. Okay, you can think a joke is not funny, and you say it, and it's the most hilarious thing possible unintentionally. Right. And then you could tell a joke you really believe is going to land, and it doesn't, and then it's just dead silence. And I don't think we should treat the two completely different based off whether or not people laugh. I think that's just something that people say, but it's not a real justifiable reason to determine whether or not something is acceptable or not.
So acceptability is basically dependent on the culture of the space you're going into for the jokes. Would that be
to some degree? There's no straight line, but one thing most comedians would tell you is like, okay, let's say Sandy Hook happens. Okay, free does happen. If you go to a comedy club and it's a dark show, make all the jokes you want. But if you're on YouTube and it just happened and you're just clowning on the fact that a bunch of kids just got shot, most comedians would be like, yeah, you're probably going to have to hold that L.
Right.
Right? Because we understand there's a difference in that context. You get me?
Yeah.
If you want to be on stage talking about yourself fucking the vice president of the world, most dudes are not going to give a fuck. If you want to make a joke, if you simulating yourself doing something, that's going to be a little bit different in a YouTube environment. Most comics are going to understand that difference. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say the line isn't clear, but I do think that veteran comedians generally know how to walk that line a lot better than newer ones.
Okay. Okay. How long have you been doing comedy for? Like, were you involved?
So I've been doing comedy for about 8 years. Okay. And it's not something like we're supposed to go on tour probably next year, but Like in Montreal, I've done tours in Canada, I've done big festivals, but it's not something I like advertise that much online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the line is so it's kind of about respecting the culture. That makes sense. Are there any examples of comedians you think like regularly, consistently cross the line? Like, are there
uh,
any clear lines? Like, when I think about one thing I think a lot about is after 9/11, there was like this hiatus. Like, SNL paused their show for like 18 days. A whole bunch of comedy shows just like stopped. They're like, it's not the time to be funny.
mhm,
And then finally, I think like what it seemed like popped the funny bridge basically was, or the dam, I guess, was The Onion made a satirical piece about 9/11 specifically, but it was aimed at making fun of the hijackers, not at like the US
sure,
citizens. And
sure.
it exploded. I mean, it's part of what like made The Onion so popular now.
Yeah.
And so I guess like how do you time that, especially as now you're a very large content creator? Like how do you time when it's okay to make jokes about certain like current events and stuff?
Hey man, listen, those are deep waters, and every time I see a comic do that, sometimes I'll laugh at the joke, and I'm like, "Damn, you push it." um, I think it's totally acceptable for people to feel outraged by the joke. I think it's completely acceptable for people to feel some type of way. I don't think that that's a cancelable offense, or I don't think that's something that should get someone censored. But I understand why people would feel that way. And I think if you're going to make some kind of dark joke about 9/11 right after it happened or something like that, or on like the anniversary, like, yeah, you gonna catch some stick for some people. Because again, the internet's weird because on one hand, for comedians, it's such a great exposure tool because it pushes you to an audience and a bunch of new eyes. At the same time, it pushes you to eyes that don't want to see what you have to offer. And what you have to offer is extremely offensive to some degree. So they can turn it off, absolutely. But if it's like you making 9/11 jokes right after 9/11, you're probably going to have to hold a few L's. I'm not going to lie. But I just wouldn't say that that should be cancelable.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's if a comedian, so then what's the, I'm hearing, because in a lot of ways comedians are artists. Like when I try to look at like public forms of like art, I kind of
Uh-huh.
argue like the worst thing we can do as a culture is put barriers on what artists can do. Like it's literally antithetical to the point of art. And in a lot of ways, comedy is just art. But I really hate when artists try to say that they have no responsibility for what their art does to other people, right? I'm like, well, look, if you put out art and it does something to sort of people, you do have a certain culpability. So, like, do you disagree? I guess I'm curious about that.
No, like here's an example. Let's say I keep bringing up kids because I think that's the most flagrant example, but it's fine. Um, let's say your kid's one of the kids at the most recent mass shooting, and I'm starting cracking jokes about those kids, like, oh, one of the little ones didn't have a wheelchair. He never had a chance, and I'm just laughing. That happens to be your sibling or somebody you have or whatever. I'm not going to be mad at you for feeling complete outrage or upset about that, right? So the comedian gonna have to hold that flag. Now, at the same time, is it his job to really care about how everyone takes the intended feelings? No. You're entitled to how you feel, and he's entitled to make those jokes if he wants to. And so, do they have a responsibility to what? To manage how other people are going to internalize their jokes?
To some extent, right? So, like, I think about the Dave Chappelle stuff with the trans woman that came up, and I mean, that is a huge. I know that's a really big topic, right? But there's a lot of people, and I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of the entire situation, but a lot of people have voiced that like he shouldn't have never brought up. I believe her name is Daphne. He should have never brought her up because he was never actually that close to her. In a lot of ways, he like took advantage and like kind of used her as a token to justify his trans jokes when they were never okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, in that way, does he have a responsibility? Like, if it turns out that he didn't have a good relationship, then he kind of like lied about the extent of the relationship for the bit that he was doing. Does he have a responsibility to the family, to the public, anything like that?
No, no, no. I don't think he has any responsibility in that regards. I think comedy's whole joke is about exaggeration. If he overplayed his relationship with the individual, like I've got no problem with that. If he wants to use that as his, launching platform to make the jokes that he wants to make, that's no, I have no issue with that. I think when people start ascribing the intentionality of transphobia, they can have that take that they're entitled to believe whatever they want. If they want to look at Dave and say he's a racist for making that KKK joke, like, I really don't care. There's nothing wrong with people ascribing. The problem is when they go the extra mile and they're saying this person's perpetuating violence or they're doing all this other stuff that they start to really lose me. Because generally, my experience with most comics, and I speak mostly to comedians because I think there's a giant difference between folks who, um, like a newscaster and comedians, is that our job is to do the extra and to the go like you find the funny generally in the exaggeration itself. And so that's why hyperbole and extremes are very useful tools for us. Even if they're not reflective of our tools, sometimes there's something hilarious about just flagrant examples.
Mhm.
And I generally give leeway to comedians because I believe that they're going for the funny. Now, if you don't want to give them that same leeway, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I have to take your stance into consideration the same way you don't have to take Dave Chappelle's own stance that he's not transphobic.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I would agree. Like, I think being hyperbolic in anything, again, there's high risk, but I don't know if specifically just because they're like a certain group of people that you just can't do any of these things.
I will say in defense of the other side, I think a lot of people obfuscate the line and
Yes.
want to constantly, sift between, oh, I'm on stage telling the truth, and then at the same time, oh, it's just jokes. Like some people really obfuscate the line when it comes to their own craft, and they're lying to themselves and to their audience about what is it doing on stage. If you want to just tell the truth, then say you want to tell the truth, but then you're in a different realm than saying you just want to tell jokes or you just want to say something that you think is funny or hilarious, even if you don't necessarily believe all of it. And so I think some people do a good job or do a poor job, if you will, of differentiating themselves in those realms. They want to at the same time be an authority figure for truth, and at the same time being given all the leeway to like remove any accountability when they say, "Oh, it's just a joke." So it's hard for understand with some people.
Right. That's actually part of why like Sneeko's line, like self-motivation line of like truth through funny is kind of dangerous because like a huge question always with any comedian is people like, well, Bill Burr is this. And you're like, well, how do you know he's joking about it? And you're like, yeah, but he makes jokes in this angle, in this direction all the time over and over. It starts looking like a pattern. And you're like, yeah, but like to what extent still is this a joke, right? Like calling Bill Burr a racist is like, well, he's married to like a black woman. That's going to be a really hard argument to win there. How do you tell? How do you tell when somebody's being truthful or like self-reporting or anything like that?
Well, I really first think about the space that they're occupying. I think there's a giant difference between a comedian's podcast where they're just ragging on jokes and free flowing and saying stuff that's kind of flagrant, right? And so I don't hold, for example, Sneeko in the same light that I hold at Andrew Schultz. But it's also true for Andrew that he does try to report on things sometimes and he tries to go at it. So it doesn't mean that he's free from all accountability with some of the stuff that he covers. And he also tries to be really smart about some more, spicier topics. But he does come at it from a consistently comedic angle. So I think I give him a lot more leeway than I would Sneeko, who's like, bringing on folks and talking about longitude studies and saying this is what's wrong with the site all the time. I think those two occupy different space, albeit even if they try to carry the same title. And you can make that same argument for Steven Crowder. Like, when's the last time Steven Crowder's done stand-up? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
He does do comedy bits on this stuff, so you got to give him some leeway there. But at the same time, if most people were to define Steven Crowder, they wouldn't say comedian. They would say Steven Crowder is a political commentator.
Right.
That would be their main thing. And so I think most of the public knows the difference between the two. And I think the way that the two engage in the matter very differently as well.
Okay. So it like Bill Burr in every way is a comedian. Like he doesn't really go on like long rants about, even when people ask his serious opinion, he's still mostly cracking jokes in the midst of it. Like when he's doing sit down, more serious interviews. And so it's really hard to like hold Bill Burr to like specifically what his positions are on anything. Do you think comedians are for that? Because in a lot of ways, comedians will like poke at a true thing about reality in like a lighthearted way that like sometimes is really cathartic. Like that's kind of how I view the Onion satire piece on 9/11. It was probably super cathartic for a lot of people. Yeah, like how much are you trying to speak the truth in your jokes and like highlight something true, and how much are you like trying to hyperbolize? Like I always have a hard time.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and it's not always clear. It's hard to tell. So I think you have to take it by case basis, and that's the unfortunate stuff. So sometimes people want rules, but I'm like, personally, I think you have to look at every situation in its own light and then choose from there.
Okay.
That's why I'm not so mad at people when they get mad at us and they're like, "Oh, we felt some of your commentary on this is off." I'm like, all right, we can own that because some of it is our opinion. So I do understand that there's a difference between when I'm just cracking jokes, which I don't apologize for, and then times where I am really focusing in on the commentary, which is what I do take accountability for. And so those two things are separate. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, there's not for you, it sounds like almost all of it's subjective. There are never any clear lines unless clear lines are set by the actual like hiring team or the actual stage director or anything like that. Like there aren't super obvious clear lines of what is and is not okay to joke about.
What is or is not okay to joke about is pretty wide net in the regards. Like if you ask me what comedians should joke about, I'd give you like 95% of things are pretty much fine in most contexts. Okay.
Right.
And then you start to leave that context or leave the context of a comedy show, and then you drop down to like 90%. And then if you leave that and you're on CNN, you're going to probably go down even further than that. So again, everything is based off the context of where your joke is being said. I guess it's like sex in a weird way. It's like or like intimacy.
Right.
When is it acceptable to kiss your partner? Well, in most contexts, it's acceptable to kiss your partner. Yes. But if you guys are at work, you can't make out with your partner.
Right.
We agree? The context is different.
Right?
You want to fuck your partner? That's fantastic. Probably can't do it in public. You certainly can't do it at work.
Can't do it when they're saying no, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay, but you can do it at home as long as both people are into it. So everything is contextual, much like jokes.
All right, that's fair. Yeah, I think the only part that I think would be relevant to me personally, because you asked like it's coming from somewhere, would be I think I feel like I have this liberal specter, right? This like fear that's always behind it being like, what's gonna be over the line, right? And I don't make jokes as much, so that's part of the issue. Is that like I don't have the like plausible deniability to be like just jokes, guys, just jokes, right?
I mean, you do to have some degree. It's just you have to understand the context of what you're doing. If you're in a therapist mode, like, yeah, you can't make the same wild jokes as everyone else. But you do have leeway to be able to make certain jokes, provided the context makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I try to stay out of therapist mode as much as possible on stream, but for so many reasons. Mostly, it's honestly really annoying. And like, so the moment I started getting trained in psychology, the most annoying thing, my dad would do this for a while. And I was like, Dad, we would have like a deeper conversation, especially when it was always when I was confronting him on something. And I'd be like, hey, this like, I've got a very, very, very conservative Christian father and my brother's very gay. So there was a lot of confrontations that had to occur around the time my brother like coming out. And so I'd be like confronting him on something about like family dynamics and relationship and how to treat your kids and blah, blah, blah. And I was also getting training and I was just doing my undergrad at that point. And he was like, well, don't go all therapist on me. And it's like, I really hate it. It's like my biggest pet peeve is the moment I have like any level of like serious discussion that involve like fifis. People are like, oh, well, you're going to the therapist mode. And I'm like, no, bro, there's nothing transformative that's occurred. Like, I'm still me talking to you and I'm still mad at you. I just happen to also now have an undergraduate degree at the point, not even an undergraduate degree in psychology.
It's not though. It's not though. You want to know why? Because your job involves peering into
what intentions do you think about the double standard of social media's bias toward left or progressive
so what your line of work
censoring
is makes conversations feel different potentially. The same way if I was fucking a sex worker, I might be like, oh, you in sex worker mode because you're doing some professional shit. Or if I was with somebody who was a cop or whatever, you might have a certain different frame of reference in regards to certain behaviors because of their line of work. And so, yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see the fact that you being a therapist colors a lot of your conversations.
Yes. The issue is that like some jobs do transformatively change what's going on and some jobs don't. I would argue an undergraduate in psychology does not transform the conversations that you're having. Like, especially like the average undergraduate in psychology. Like, I'm gonna be honest, like as somebody who like, I'm a big fucking nerd. Most undergraduates in psychology don't even know that much about psychology by the end. Like they're like, because most people cram for like last minute midterms, then they dump all the information on the paper and then they walk away and they forget all about it. So it's like, this is where I like hesitated. Like I would agree, like if you're a police officer and you've been in the field for 15 years, that's an extremely different like body of knowledge and transformation of like way that you view the world than if you were 2 years into your undergraduate psychology degree, just talking about fifis. Like there's not something that transformative going on. The only thing that could be transformative is if they're actually trying to psychoanalyze you all the time.
Yes. I think that's a fair analysis to make. I think the problem becomes a public perception of what an undergraduate degree looks like is completely different than what it is that you're describing.
Yeah.
And two, people don't know you're not doing it
Undergrad.
because they might. It's like when you go to therapy and you say something and the therapist starts writing shit down. You're like, yo, what has she got going on? She's cooking her head. I don't know if you. How do I know you ever turn that part of your brain off? You get what I'm trying to say? And so from their perspective, you're always on and you can always see more than you think you can. And I think, to be fair, most people nowadays, therapists or not, can already feel like they see more than they actually can. And so you being a therapist will probably add an extra layer of that. Like, I personally find it so annoying when someone's like, oh, I think you're suppressing your, I'm like, oh, this bitch. You know, shut up. So I could imagine being with a therapist being like extra vigilant against that, because I think a lot of people feel, if not patronized, I think it's just like, it's almost like an invasion of privacy.
Like how dare you read my mind, basically? Like
Yeah.
how dare you try to get in this skull? You didn't.
Yeah.
You're not consenting to you reading my mind. I think that's the issue, is that we think something transformatively has happened, that people who've studied psych can read your mind. When I'm gonna be honest, they just can't. Like, I know literally they can, and everyone knows that. But I mean, like most undergrad psych students, like, this is why I hate like schizo kind of psychoanalytic. I don't want to say Mr. Girl posting, because I'm like, you don't know anything. You're literally wrong about everything. You know nothing, and you're wrong about this person. Like, holy shit, stop.
You don't like the overuse of the term narcissism, or
no, I don't like the overuse of psych terms in general, because psych terms have become like this bludgeoning weapon to just like defeat your enemies with. It's like, there's no longer like the asshole parent or ex. They're like the narcissistic ex, and it's just like, it's not that prevalent of a disorder. They can't all be narcissists. It's not possible.
No,
everyone you've dated.
Everyone. 3 of my boyfriends who are a nurse, I'm like, damn, bitch, you got some bad luck. That's like hitting the lottery.
No, that's your fault. If you've literally dated that many, oh my gosh. If you've literally dated like 7 narcissists, you really need to analyze who you're attracted to. Like, you need to do therapy, because that is very strange. Like, that is not good.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that point.
Okay. We talked a little bit about women not realizing what's going on in men's half the time. I feel like you and I have a disagreement on, you know what we really disagree on is men's aesthetic, actually.
Go for it. What do we disagree on men's aesthetic for?
Well, I was in a conversation with you and Steven and talking about how men's aesthetic really matters. And it's important that guys like, and I'm surprised that you push back on me, because I actually feel like you have a decently cohesive like aesthetic. Like you tend to be like,
wait. When you say I disagree, like when you say men's aesthetic, what do you mean? What did I disagree on, if you want to?
Okay, sure. I'll outline what I think is fine and men should do. So first of all, almost all straight men don't think about aesthetic at all. They put on clothes that fit and are functional. They put on pants and shoes, and then they walk out the door, and a jacket. And it's all utility, almost exclusively. That's most men. And they do like basic hygiene. And then if they're like, I don't have a jawline, they do a beard. And if they do have a jawline, they tend to keep it shortly cut. And that's kind of it. I would argue that men should actually work towards having a very cohesive and intentional aesthetic, right? So they're picking specific colors of clothing that work well with their like skin tone, and like sometimes even emphasize like certain parts about their personality. I think beard grooming is important. And this is where probably we disagree. I'm okay with men wearing very subtle amounts of makeup.
That's where you're no. Okay. Oh no, you just slipped it in there. Weasley Erudite there. I just saw what you did, because I just remembered the conversation. It was not about men's aesthetic. This was about whether
This is about men's aesthetic.
No. The conversation was about whether or not it's cool for dudes to wear makeup. Okay?
And not
whether
exclusively.
or not it's socially acceptable.
Hold on. Steven was arguing that men can't even wear like slightly tight pants. And he said men wearing like tight pants isn't stylish. And I was like, what the fuck do you mean? Of course men wear tight pants.
Steven, I don't believe that. I know like plenty of like, you know, metrosexual European men who wear tight pants every day. So that's not true. But the makeup part,
it's so in. On that. Gen Z, fucking e-boys are in. They're so in. Absolutely. Because I think the main reason guys don't want to wear makeup is they don't want to be perceived as being feminine. And I think like if you're doing all the blush and all this stuff, yes. And the worst part is all the makeup stores are trying to be like makeup for men. And then they do makeup on a man and they make him look as feminine as possible. It drives me crazy. But like eyebrow fillers for men, that's going to be a game changer.
No. So here's the thing. It isn't even just about how it looks. It's about what it represents. And there are many women out there who will self-admittedly be unattracted to a man who's too preoccupied with his looks. And I would argue that the idea of putting makeup on your face as a man would be crossing the line with women.
I feel like then you just don't need to date those women.
Right.
Like what a valueless thing to care about as a woman. Like, I agree that some women will hold that. The issue is I have a problem with...
I would argue most. I actually think it would be most. In fact, you're a conservative woman. You grew up in church. If you went to church as a man with any makeup on your face and folks found out, I promise you they would look at you crazy.
For sure. For sure at church. No question. On the internet now, like... E-boys are so popular. There's tons of TikTok guys who do like a little bit of eyeliner, they do the nails, and they do, I'm pretty sure, some BB cream. It's really, really subtle. It just smooths out their skin tone a little bit. It improves their aesthetic a little bit. I think if you told the girl date 1, she'd be like, icky. By date 5, she's so bought in already that I don't think it would be a problem. If you're like, yeah, I just do a little bit of BB cream to smooth my skin out, moisturize it a little bit, she'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, like that makes sense. I think most girls would be like that. And the girls who wouldn't, I'm gonna be honest, you don't need them.
I think first off, E-boys is a young girls game, and I think that's something that people obsess over at a younger age. I think as you get older, people kind of move out of that phase. That's 1. 2, I don't use the internet as a barometer for what I think people find socially acceptable in dating. I think online people will, profligate and say like, oh yeah, I like the idea of a man in a dress. I think in real life, most people are really
Hold on. Man in the dress is far from BB cream. BB cream is lotion with a small skin toned tint. You can rub it into your beard and not see it.
When I say dress, I'm more so comparing it to the idea of makeup. Okay.
I get that. I get that.
So I'm not talking about moisturizing your skin. I'm not talking about using some face cream. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual makeup. I think
BB cream is makeup. Just to be clear, it is makeup. It's tinted lotion. It does cover your skin a little bit.
If I hear lotion, I don't think much of it. If you're telling me this thing completely like changes the color of your skin, I mean, that's gonna make some people feel something. So maybe I don't know what BB cream is, but when you talk, I'll stick to the original example, which is eyeliner, I believe is what you said.
No,
or
eyebrow
mascara.
filler. No, eyebrow filler. I would never advocate for men to do eyeliner or mascara because curled up eyelashes is pretty feminine.
Even eyebrow filler. If I'm confident that I think most women, if they found out their mains was using eyebrow filler or, a lot of like more feminine type of makeup, I think they would probably find that pretty unappealing.
I guarantee BB cream and eyebrow filler would be totally fine. Because damn, a boy goes up like 2 points if you go from no eyebrows. I know this. I am a no eyebrowless woman. Okay. I go from being basically a chemo patient goblin to a pretty attractive woman just by putting on eyebrows. Like today, all I have on is eyebrows and blush and like my freckles, and that's it. And I already look a lot more put together than if I didn't have eyebrows. Eyebrows are such a game changer for men. I know. I'm having more men now in my space be like, maybe I'll try it. And then they get just a little brush. All it is a little brush. You just tint your eyebrow hairs. You don't even change how many hairs there are. Whew.
Hey, listen. Hey, listen, y'all have to try whatever y'all want. Y'all want to be as open-minded. You want to paint your fingernails and do all that stuff. Go ham. That ain't for me. But,
that's fair. I'm not saying for you.
Do I think, here's what I would say. I think when it comes to managing your looks, I think it's important to manage your aesthetic. That's why you don't hear me say like, all right, don't take care of the way that you dress. If you want to be more appealing to the opposite sex, don't do a bunch of this stuff. Like, absolutely do it. It will help you. I just, eyebrow filler is not on my list. If it ever became part of my list, it would be at the very bottom. And I question whether or not it's a Trojan horse that's probably going to have more negative than positive. Because I do think that women, if they found out a man was using eyebrow filler or, you know, all these kinds of weird lotions and stuff like that, I think a lot of them would be turned off. And
I think if he looks good enough, like this is why like girls always talk about like they'll find a man and they're like, oh my gosh, he's so attractive. And then they'll be like, he's probably gay though, right? Like most women, when they see a guy who's like really clearly like put some energy into like looking good and clean and like he's really well put together, like the fucker's gay. There's no shot that he's into women. There's no shot. But all the women want to fuck that guy. They just know that they can't because he's not into them.
I mean, if a dude consistently looks gay, I don't know how much women really want to fuck him.
I don't know. This is like, I'm doing heavy lifting for the black pill. I'm basically saying that like, if women could have choices between two guys, same guy, one day he's a 5 and one day he's a 7 because he like put on some BB cream and like fixed his eyebrows. She'd want the 7 every single time. And I think like most girls would get over it, except for like some really Tradcon conservative girls. They'd probably have an issue with it. But I think a lot of like
Hold up. You remember when Steven went on the Fresh and Fit podcast and he was making a lot of sense. Then they told him he was bisexual and everybody lost all interest in anything he had to say. They just completely invalidated every experience that he has.
Sort of. I still feel like a lot of the women listen to him though.
No, they were pretty much
which
just
one?
like
The one that I was on with him?
Well, I think you might have been there with him. A lot of women were clowning him because he was gay. They came out on TikToks afterwards, pretty much because he was bisexual.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's the one I was on with Angela Ho and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then in the comments, it was pretty much like, we not listening to nobody. I think when you start to say that you're putting out, there's going to be not the same degree, but a similar reaction.
I would just argue that a lot of men who are like going to be willing to put in the extra effort to do aesthetic are probably already a little bit more liberal to like moderate. They tend to probably live more in cities. And most of the women that they're going to be dating are probably going to be a little bit more open-minded toward that and not care. This is why I'm agreeing. I think the Tradcon girls, the girls on that episode were fucking wild. Those girls were agreeing with the craziest shit. They were like, I'm totally for one-sided open relationships. Like, don't see, don't hear, no problem. And I was like, shut the fuck up. That's not true. It was crazy.
When women describe an ideal man to me, you know what often comes up? They don't think of like metrosexualness. What they often mention is like they want the guy to be able to change the tires. They want the dude like that's like a super common, like the whole, you know, the guy who like he's all oiled up and he's changing the car. He's like, that is such a super common like traditional form of masculinity that people describe as like really hot. It's why like a lot of those white dudes with like the plaid shirts and the pants, like that's like super in for a lot of people. So when I think about that form of traditional masculinity being very common, very interesting to people, I just don't see the ways in which that coexists with the whole eyeliner and mascara thing.
I didn't say eyeliner. I didn't say mascara. I said brows. Hold on. Heavy brows are a big marker of masculinity. They actually, tall, dark, and handsome. When you look at tall, dark, and handsome models, they don't have pencil thin eyebrows that don't exist. That's not what they look like. They're motherfuckers who have fucking unibrows if they weren't plucking. For sure. Like, and here's the thing. They don't need to find out that I'm not advocating for men to be putting on so much makeup that they look like me. I'm saying that men could use makeup to somewhat emphasize certain masculine features that make them more physically. Now we gotta hide it,
bro. We're not supposed to even advertise the fact that we're doing this shit. Why would you tell them not to advertise the fact that they do that?
Most girls don't try to advertise it. Like, natural look is a very popular style. Hold on. Would you have known that these eyebrows were fake if I didn't tell you?
No, but I'm not looking at you like
exactly.
That. One, I think no. One, I'm not looking at you like that. One, two, it doesn't matter because as a woman, if you're doing this stuff to enhance your looks, you know, as long as it's within the frame of like makeup and stuff, most dudes are pretty accepting of that. They don't care. I think when you're telling men not to advertise that or to not be open about it, the reason why you're doing it subconscious, I think you know this, is that women would be turned off by it and they would be openly turned off by it. If you told most men right now, oh, my eyebrows are natural, they don't give a fuck. They don't care. They would not care they would not look at you double take. They would not matter. I think deep down, you know this as well. If they openly admitted to the fact that they failed their eyebrows in their dating profiles, a lot of women would swipe left.
I'm not saying that they openly admit to it, but to be honest, I think the same would be true for women. If I like on my dating profile, if I said just a heads up, my eyebrows are fake, everyone would be like, what kind of fucking weird cap is this, right? It's just fucking weird to talk about it.
No.
Yes. Why would you advertise this? Why would you be like, make make sure when you check my thing, just so you know, I'm wearing makeup. I actually am a 5, even though I look like a 7. Like, no girls are saying this because it's weird. Just like guys don't need to advertise that they're wearing BB cream and filling in their eyebrows. They can just take their photos and look good. And by date 5, she's bought in. If she's actually even kind of weird about makeup, when she finds out that you're great and interesting and you have good sex, and she finds out, oh, you put on a little BB cream and eyebrow stuff, she's for sure going to cope and manifest that into being not just cool, but fucking bait. She'll be like, oh, my man's open-minded. Absolutely, this would be fine. You just don't tell them on date 1 because it's fucking weird. Be like if I sat down and I was like, just so you know, I'm wearing a push-up bra, just so we all know. Like, that would be weird.
It's not weird. It's not weird. Here's the thing. If you said that stuff, the vast majority of dudes don't care. If you say, I openly wear makeup, dudes do not give a fuck. They will not care about the fact that you're admitting to wearing makeup because most people expect you to be enhancing your looks to some degree physically in terms of that stuff. If a man openly admitted to the fact on his dating profile that he had any form of makeup, didn't even specify, but he just said, I like putting makeup on, I promise you there's going to be a huge majority of women who are going to be revolted.
I'll give it to you. You're right about that. What I'm saying, though, is that social stigma doesn't change the fact that the individual woman will look at you. If you don't tell her that you're wearing makeup as a man and you're just a little bit hotter than you otherwise look, by the time she does find out, she'll be bought in enough that she won't care. So you're right. So I will give you the social stigma. It's going to be way more socially normal, obviously, for women to just be wearing makeup.
So I'll concede this point. Could it be that wearing this kind of eyeliner or like whatever, eyebrow filler, BB boo cream, whatever it is, okay?
Booba cream.
Could this enhance you and make you more desirable? I believe it. It's possible, okay? I'm not doubting that. What I would say is if I'm counseling men and I'm telling them what they need to do to improve themselves in terms of how they're approachable, I would not tell them to do stuff that they would potentially have to hide from their partner or not be upfront about, or that would be seen as shameful. I would just tell them to do the stuff that works really well, which is get good haircuts, take care of facial grooming, manage your skin really well, work out, all these little things, styling your clothes. These are things that are practical, that you can openly admit to, that you could say, and nobody would care. So that would be the kind of advice that I would give people first and foremost, and I think is more valuable.
Absolutely. And I agree with all of that. I just basically tell people, if you want to go the extra level, you have really bad acne, you have blotchy skin, you've got certain things about your face that don't look good. If you get good at really subtle makeup, you can offset that. And I genuinely don't think most women would care, especially if they don't find out until like date 4 or 5.
Okay. I will have to do an experiment on this at some point, but I'm pretty sure if you polled the audience and you polled people and polled ladies, I think a lot of them would feel weird about dudes wearing makeup.
Absolutely. If you poll them right now, because here's the thing, I don't trust anyone on what they prefer, right? I think everyone copes and manifests all the time, especially women. So if I ask a lot of women, would you be okay with your man wearing makeup? They're gonna be like, no, right? That's effeminate. And then if I show them 2 pictures of the same man, one where he's wearing BB cream and eye stuff, and one where he's not, and just saying, these are twins, which one are you more attracted to? They're gonna pick the guy with the BB cream and the eye like the eyebrow filler every single time.
That's true for many things, but I think if women found, you could say the same thing for plastic surgery at that point. You could say, like, guys, might as well get your tummies tucked, get a little BBL because girls like booty, and might as well do all this other stuff, provided there's no risk in my example, okay? And women would probably look at the dude with the fatter ass and say, oh, I like men with a bum. I do find it more attractive. But if they came to find out that he had some surgery done or he was enhancing his looks that way, they would absolutely start to judge him, and it would color their perception of him there going forward. I feel very similarly, I'll bet to a lesser degree, if they found out that this man was using some kind of eye stuff or whatever it is.
Eyebrow stuff. Yeah. I still wouldn't encourage men to do eye stuff.
No, but you get what I was trying to say in regards to the plastic surgery?
I do, but I think that's in part because, like, there's a certain level of vanity that we do judge men on. What I'm saying is I actually think culture is shifting a little bit, and that, like, men have a little bit more wiggle room for vanity. I think if they hear that you're spent like $12,000 on like a tiny BBL as a man, they'd think that's kind of weird. But if you spend $10 at Walmart for like BB cream that you can call lotion, I don't think
it has nothing to do with the money. It has nothing to do with the money. Even if BBLs were only $10 and dudes started getting them, women would be super judgmental about it to even a higher degree. It wouldn't matter.
Is wearing Timberlands a lie? Is wearing Timberlands a lie?
No, but if they found out you were wearing heels or if they were wearing insoles that increased your height, you would absolutely get judged. Because when people wear Timberlands, okay, generally, at least my experience, they're not thinking like, oh my God, it makes me substantially taller. People just like Timbs because of the aesthetic. If you were wearing shoes that were strictly to make yourself look taller as a man, absolutely you would get judged.
I think if it was too far of an extent, I do think there's
Timberland's a hip hop thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Timberlands. It makes sense.
This is hip hop.
Wait, but here's the difference. If you can get a shoe that looks good and gives you boost, there's every time I go into the fucking like shoe store, there's more and more men's shoes that have increasingly massive platforms, but they style it in a way that looks really good and doesn't look like you're wearing massive platforms. And the reason they're doing that is because height is so essential for a lot of dating things. And I actually don't think people would care that much. Again, she'll probably be a little bit disappointed when you take off your shoes and you like drop down 1.5 inches. But I actually think most women, especially like most decent women, it might be a small thing. She might judge you a little bit. Just like, to be honest, we would judge women if they like take off all of their makeup and we're like, oh, surprise, like she doesn't look anything like what you thought she does, right? That is going to exist if you're going to like really far extremes. I just don't think it's the worst thing to do if you're like wanting to boost your chances, especially in the dating world for men, which is kind of ruthless, and men have a rough go in the dating world.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it might help some dudes, and I don't know. For me, it's definitely a line I would never cross. But I think some dudes, if they're open to it, they want to try it out, go ham. If they want to pull the whole metrosexual thing where they're wearing nail polish and looking a little extra zazzy, then good for them. Some people are into that. That's not my.
Do you think generally the kind of women I go for.
Do you think I have tall men? Probably. Yeah, absolutely. I've been, at 6 feet. You definitely get the good stuff.
I feel like almost every short guy wears like a mixture of Timberlands and Air Maxes because they're always trying to maximize on like natural. Like Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart is always in Timberlands, and it's not just because of hip hop. It's probably also because he's short, and it gives him a little extra like half inch.
Yeah, but every black person I know in my area got a pair of Timbs. So I'm not gonna lie. Like that was just a thing for a long time. Even I got a pair of Timbs, and I don't need them. I just like wearing them because they're fun. They're really nice boots. 2, I mean, for me, it's like I grew up on these. For me, it's just a thing.
That's fair.
So it's like a cultural thing.
I still think
and I think it's a cultural thing especially for black folks. Like super common to have a pair of Timbs.
So you don't think that at the end of the day, if somebody's done everything else for looks maxing, they've gotten a good trim on their beard, they've gotten all these things, they're wearing Timberlands to give them a little bit of extra height, all sorts of things. If we say wear some BB cream, get your eyebrows, especially if they have eyebrows, obviously there's no person, wear some BB cream to smooth your skin.
You know what it is? Here's the truth. If you've done all those things and you still struggling so much with dating, it's because you ain't got game. I'm sorry. If you've gotten in shape, you got clear skin, you feel me? You got a job, you dress well, you got a good haircut, all that stuff, and you still get no play, you suck at dating and you suck at talking to women. And I would tell you to start emphasizing that way more because all that other shit don't matter. Some of y'all just need to actually learn to talk to these ladies. So
I would absolutely agree that it was more game. The issue is I'm saying I don't think it's the worst thing to also say if you want to do BB cream, you can. And I genuinely, my only position is I don't actually think women would like walk away from you the moment that they found out.
I don't think they would walk away in that moment. I don't think they're just going to leave the table and be like, bitch, you paying for this shit I didn't even get to eat. Bye. I don't think they're going to just walk away. But, I mean,
I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, especially if you're a short guy, you've got a whole bunch of good game, but you've got a bit of acne. So you put on a little bit of BB cream to help you out a little bit with the skincare, but you've got good game. You're interesting. You make your first safe. Your sex is great. All sorts of things. When she finds out with the BB cream, I really don't think it's going to be a make or break. And that's the advice that I'm giving. I'm not saying BB cream first. That's going to make whether women want you or not. I'm saying
on this one, we're on an impasse on this one. And so what I would probably say is we'd have to do some kind of experiment to figure it out. But my experience in talking to women and dating is I don't think they'd be open to that shit. But that's me. So I think we just disagree on this point.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. I'll do an experiment sometime.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's worth doing. But I know you don't value what people would openly say, but I do think it's pretty telling when women would openly say, I'm not open to that kind of stuff. I'm not open to dudes in dresses. I'm not open to dudes with eyebrow filler or any of that stuff. I think that speaks to something, even if it's not always indicative of the absolute truth. There's something there. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's also possible that I'm...
I also think, the whole Destiny thing was so fascinating to me because even the most progressive women I meet, I start talking to them about some bisexual men and they recoil. Like they say it first, I remember I was talking to one girl, and we were having a conversation about like, I but like, you ever try gay stuff? I'm like, nah, I'm not into that. And she's like, well, why don't you? I'm not interested in even trying things. I'm not curious about it, right? She's like, well, what if I was curious? Would you think that's fun? I'm like, yeah, girls want to go do some little gay shit. Like, I don't care. Like, go ahead. I'll watch whatever. And she's like, oh, well, that's a double standard. I'm like, maybe, but you play to that double standard too. She said, no, I don't. And so I asked her, I'm like, what if you found out the dude you're really into was bisexual? How would you feel about that? She started stuttering a little bit, right? And I'm like, come on, tell me the truth. What if you found out this dude, before he's dating you, he liked taking big old dicks in the ass? And her face literally went into straight disgust. And I think internally, what she was thinking in that moment was, that's gross. Externally, as she kind of sat with it a little bit, she started like, well, she started stuttering a little bit. Just that hesitation to me is like a very strong indication of how people feel subconsciously, irrespective of whatever political opinions that they have. And I think that kind of like feminine aspect or behavior from a man is like super repulsive to a lot of ladies. So, yeah.
Yeah, it does. Hey, so here's a really weird thing. Women, I would agree with you that a lot of women react. Like, it seems like women, when you ask them, they're sexually repulsed by the idea of a dude doing effeminate shit, like kissing a dude or sucking a dick. And yet, the number one porn that women consume is gay porn and yaoi.
Sure.
Which is, I don't understand. How do both of these two things exist?
Well, I mean, if they just want to see a lot of men, it's like, what's better than one dude? Two dudes. You feel me? Like, I guess I could understand that in terms of like what you would find sexually appealing, like, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily open to it. There's plenty of people who watch porn that they don't actually engage in themselves. Is that like bizarre to you?
I just think it's, so one thing that I'm thinking about when we're like having this disagreement is it's possible, like when I'm talking about like the BB cream, I'll even include maybe bisexuality. I feel like if I went to like Silicon Valley or LA, I think I would receive a lot more receptivity from women about that. Whereas I think if I was in like Miami or like certain parts of like Louisiana or just like much more traditionally conservative spaces, I would expect more exactly like what you're saying, like repulsion, that even by date 5, if she finds out he's got BB creams, she's like, ooh, that's kind of weird. Do you think that that's possible, that these two kind of dating cultural?
Wait. The most viewed category for women is lesbian.
Is it now?
Yeah, it's lesbian. And then it's popular with women. Then it's Japanese. Then it's threesomes. Then it's ebony, amateur, anal, mature, big dick. I don't even think dudes are solo male. I guess they watch solo dudes masturbate. But I don't think women watch gay stuff.
I feel like that's such a classic internet meme, is like girls watching like gay porn.
Hey, you said that, and I had to double take because I remember reading up on this. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I do not remember reading that. Women traditionally watch lesbian porn, and I think the reason why they watch lesbian porn is because the way women engage lesbian porn is not as like, I'm gonna fuck your hole. They generally do it in a way that's like more intimate or more focused on touch and sensualness, and so lesbian porn is much more to women's liking. And so, yeah.
Interesting.
Meme debunked.
Clearly. Lesbian porn, you're right. Lesbian porn is one of the number one trending. Yeah. And then I think first is still erotic novels in general, though, I would suspect.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely popular, but I think those are generally straight heteronormative. I know, like, for example, when you think of stuff like, what's it called? 50 Shades of Grey, like, that was just a complete domination.
Oh, apparently.
Masculine man, doing all that shit.
Yeah, apparently, like, 10 years ago, women were the number one consumer of gay porn. Yeah. So it's not that gay porn is the thing that women prefer the most. It was that gay porn was most consumed by women, but that was also like 10 years ago. Yeah.
Good to know.
All right.
So, yeah. So that's my thoughts on grooming and shit like that.
All right. We're going to do an experiment. Should we use your face?
You can use whatever face you want to do.
Well, I need you to put on BB cream and eyebrow filler.
I ain't doing none of that shit.
Okay.
I got cred to maintain, and I would literally. I've done TV show appearances where they try to put makeup on my face, and I'm like, no. And they got so mad at me. And to be fair, in their defense, it is very normal for dudes when they're going on television to do makeup for cameras and lighting that stuff. But I just hated the idea of like them putting weird creams I never heard of on my face and shit like that. So I said no.
Not even like the powder that they try to put on to like reduce the reflection.
I don't know. I washed my face and I went up on there. I got good skin. Don't fuck with it.
That's fair. We don't want eyebrows.
no, listen, I got fucked up eyebrows. Like one of them was like half disappearing. You feel me? I'm okay with that. I own some of my faults. I don't try to fix everything to make everything optimal. I'm cool with some of it.
That's fair. Do you mind if I ask you just a super chat question that I found interesting?
Sure, go for it.
People are wondering if your views or takes have changed since you've interacted more with the live streaming communities.
Well, I think Destiny is very different for me. So he's pretty much the only person I've really interacted with from the live streaming community, and he's like super pro-establishment. So that's been interesting to kind of unpack because I haven't heard like too many rational people speak pro-establishment without sounding like a shill all the time. So that's been good.
What do you mean sounding like a shill? Like, what are your markers of that?
I don't know. Some people, the way they suck off the government just makes me cringe incredibly. Like the government can do no wrong, and I'm like, bitch, I know, I've seen it firsthand. So
yeah.
So yeah, I don't like that, but I think Destiny offers like good criticism of the government whilst also highlighting some of the strength that we can both acknowledge, and so that makes me more understanding of like infrastructure and why things are broken and why it's not always like some evil conglomerate, things like that.
Because you've been in YouTube, how many years have you been doing YouTube for?
So I've been on YouTube since 2012, but like I would take long breaks in between videos.
Okay. So like give or take 10 years. Is the live streaming community different than like the more like record and release, like not just video essays, but like standard YouTube communities versus like live streaming specifically?
I don't know. There's like Twitch crossover with live streaming. I feel like it's its own world because I don't think when I see, like I don't watch too much live streamers, but if I look at someone like Low Tier God, or if I'm watching somebody like, who is it? I Show Speed. I feel like they occupy a very different space than what Destiny does.
Yeah.
So when you say does a live streaming thing look different, what are you asking about specifically?
So I find I worked like normal work beforehand, yeah. And I think you were in military and security or something, right?
No, I was in the military and I worked at banks before.
Banks, okay. It's been really interesting for me to like transition from working in like government and professional positions to online streaming, especially based on like essentially what you would call like my coworkers. But even calling them coworkers isn't quite right? Because we're not working together as a team towards the same functional goal. We're coworkers and competitors at the same time. It's been really interesting, like seeing like recently, like there's like some of the insults I'll see levied at me are like, I don't know how to even do anything but laugh because they're just so grade 2. Like I'm like, somebody recently was calling me ear picker because I've had an ear infection for a couple of weeks. So I itch at my ear every now and then. And it's just like, it's just the strange, like, I don't even care that much. It's fine. It's just strange. Like I would never, when I saw that, I literally didn't know what to do. I was just like, I've never would expect anyone to make a comment about this. Like what a strange thing to even bring up.
Yeah. And so what you're asking me, like, how do you cope with that? Or?
Well, not really. I've basically come to the conclusion. I'm curious what your thoughts about this, in that like streaming is a career, but it's not a job in the way that like most people who go to a job, you learn a certain number of skills that are kind of necessary for like some element of professionalism and working within the working world, right? So you got to learn how to like write proper business emails. You got to learn how to like listen to your manager and like, even if you disagree with them, still like listen to what they say. So like navigating managers, right? Having a proper job, showing up on time, being consistent about things. Whereas like a lot of times when you work, especially with like people who've only streamed, it's like, it's a vastly different experience in trying to work with them, where like streamers are notorious for never being on time, not being very professional, never emailing back. There's constantly like undercutting and bickering and like backstabbing and stuff like that. That just like, I just didn't quite expect, I guess. Maybe I should have, but I wasn't very internet-y, so.
Right. So I feel like streaming is more like high school for people who make millions of dollars. I don't consider it a workplace per se. Yeah. However, because of the kind of income that's coming in, there are certain rules. Same way if you go to school, there's certain rules.
Yeah.
So it isn't work, but at the same time, you get paid, but there are rules.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. It is a career. So, I'm not trying to say that streamers don't work hard or YouTubers don't work hard. It's really, in fact, this has been the most stressful job I've worked at. And I used to work at like forensic lockups. It's really, really stressful. It's hard to call it. I think maybe workplace is a better word, actually. Like it's not a workplace. Obviously, it's not work in the same way.
Good. So we at least on the same page in that regard. So yeah, if you're asking me, like how I engage in this space or how I've seen it change, essentially.
Well, I'll go back to the original question. Somebody ask Abba if his views or takes have changed since interacting more with live streaming communities. I'm just wondering basically if there's a difference between the two communities or anything like that. Because I've been shocked by live streaming. Yeah.
Yeah, I think individually, like I said, some of the pro-establishment stuff has definitely like changed for me, which is a pretty big shift. I would say alternatively, watching them interact makes me realize just like, I've been part of forums before, but being in a forum or on a Reddit board is not the same as watching people who are like socially retarded have lengthy conversations about social dynamics. And so it's very bizarre to me watching people who don't seem to have much real world experience like talking so much about the real world and how they view it. I'm like, I don't think people actually resonate or reflect the stuff that you talk about or the way that you talk about it. So it's kind of hard for me to understand. It's almost like it's like being at the zoo and watching an endangered species. Like, how are these fucking things real, you know? So yeah, how has it changed me, or if it's changed?
Has it changed? Yeah. Is there a difference between like your standard YouTuber and your live streamer and just like their personality, their ilk, their characteristics?
I don't know enough YouTubers to make that kind of change, but I will say, I do feel like live streamers, from what I've seen, are generally social retards. Yeah.
So that's interesting that you don't actually know a lot of YouTubers. If you're not a live streamer, is there way less collaboration than if you're just like a standard YouTuber who just like pre-records?
Yeah, I mean,
there's no community.
I didn't collaborate with anyone until about a year and a half ago. So I just kind of did my own thing. And that's what's awesome about YouTube. It allows you a lot of space to do your own thing without needing to buddy up with everybody, you know? Right. Whereas I think on, I watch streams on like sometimes Twitch and you see like everybody's just like sharing or they're sending streams over to this person or they're talking about this. It's not like that on YouTube nearly as much. And so It's not necessary. So yeah. I think from my perspective, I feel like it is a very different world.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and also a lot of the YouTubers I watch, I feel like if I saw them in real life, they'd be socially functional. Whereas I'll even watch streamers that go to like the TwitchCon, and I'm just like, who are these people? But again, I think it's just a different world. Like when I watch a lot of YouTubers, I'm like, I think you're a functional human being, but like the way that you act online, I feel like in person you'd be the same. And then I watch Twitch people and I'm like, you're dysfunctional online and I feel like you'd be retarded. Oh, you actually are a retarded in person. And so that's, I think, the big difference that I see between the spaces.
Yeah, I'm trying. So one thing I've noticed when I talk to other streamers, when I try to outline this difference of like, it is hard work, it is a career, but it's not quite a job because you're not learning some of like the basic things that every other person who does like 9-to-5s or shift work have to functionally learn to like exist as an adult in this world. You don't have to learn it. You have to learn other things and you have to navigate these like really, really like kind of parasitic relationships all the time. But they get really offended. Like they get really, really mad at me. I don't know how to communicate it better. Is there any way you can find that would be more palatable to communicate? It's super important to understand.
You're trying to communicate the fact that like that this medium doesn't. Sorry, what are you trying to communicate?
I want people to understand that there's a pretty big difference between having a career in streaming and having a job, because the things that you learn in a job like streamers who have not had jobs have a very distinctive type of way that you interact with them. And you can tell this motherfucker's never had a job. And it's really important that viewers understand this difference, right? That's why when you listen to like communists who have never had a job talking about their own money, you're like, are you stupid? Like, are you too? That's what I really want viewers to understand.
I don't think you can explain to people who haven't been through it what it's like, because I think a lot of the intricacies of what a job feels like are completely things you understand only from a first person experience. It's akin to like trying to explain to a teenager what having a job is like. It's not possible. And that's why I speak of the social retardation. I think a lot of these people never grow out of that phase to some degree in terms of like their responsibilities to society and things like that. So they don't understand what a job is like. It'd be akin to a military person trying to explain, military life to somebody. It's like, it's just not going to happen if they haven't been through it. It's a very difficult thing to relate to other people. And so when you speak to me about how to explain to streamers, I don't think you can. The same way I don't think I can explain to most streamers that, like, their social interactions are so fucking goofy and so strange. I don't think they even really understand it that well.
Yeah. Yeah, I just really want them to understand, like, streaming isn't a job. It's a career, but it's not a job, and you don't learn certain things in it that you would learn in any other. Because even military, I've never been in the military, but there's certain things that I'm going to understand that we would have. We've had managers together. We understand that negotiation of, like, hating your manager, but having to, like, respect authority no matter what, having to work with coworkers you dislike and kind of just make peace. Like, there's certain elements, how to write a professional email that streamers don't have to learn if they've never had a job. Like, it's not a job because you don't learn job things, but it's a career and it's hard work, obviously.
I think one thing you got to accept sometimes is you can't convince people of things like that, or you can't, like, relate that experience to them. I think you could try and use perfect analogies and do all this other stuff, but I think there's certain things you got to experience to really understand. It's akin to, like, trying to talk to virgins about sex. I don't think they can get it until they actually do it. You can prime them for it, you can kind of do all this other stuff, but until they experience it, they won't really understand.
I got another interesting super chat. There's a bunch of people wanting to, I think, hold your feet to the fire on something. I don't know much about this, and I feel like I'm probably going to agree with you, but John Easton asked, what is your issue with Pearly Things verbiage about women, but you're okay with Destiny calling women retarded children to prove a point?
Okay, I don't think things are the same thing. I think somebody advocating for the fact that, like, women shouldn't be allowed to vote and that women shouldn't have access to birth control because birth control is the root of all evil. It's completely different than saying women are retarded children in some kind of discussion and being hyperbolic. Those are very different. So
I would agree.
I don't even understand what the comparison is. Like,
I think they're basically trying to be like, why is your problem with, like, essentially Pearly kind of infantilizing women and Destiny infantilizing? That's, like, the best drama I can give it. But
I mean, even if you try to steal,
they're so different. They're so different.
I think wanting to pass legislative, saying, like, if I want to run for office, and if my ideal world, women wouldn't be allowed to vote, and that's completely different than saying you think a group of people are retarded children. We can both say both are bad, or you can have a discussion about both. But I don't even understand how those things are analogous.
Yeah. Have you seen the context for when she said that? Like, when she says, because she kind of, from what I remember her saying, she said, I don't think women should have the vote if they're not willing to be drafted, was specifically what I think she said. Now, there's lots of reasons.
Dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I still disagree with her, but I'm just wondering if there's any other context. Have you heard about her birth control? Like, why is she opposed to birth control? I don't know much.
Yeah. I mean, the drafting is dumb. So, like, would you remove the ability to vote to people who are disabled or people over 35 who are no longer eligible for the draft? Do they lose that right too? What about people who were never drafted but had to sign up for it but never actually had to risk going? Like, I don't understand the criteria. Here's the thing. If you get down to the root of it, which I think is what should happen instead of doing this hyperbolic, like, I'm going to just say flagrant things that are stupid. If you just went to the part of it, which is saying, this society is too sex-focused. With all these freedoms, we're not acknowledging the consequence of these choices. And I think it was better at a time where women had less agency because then they made better decisions. We can have that conversation. But I don't understand why you have to jump to the next retarded step, which is, like, remove their ability to vote and remove their access to birth control. You just sound crazy. Yeah. So just have that discussion. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think you can make strong points for the fact that sexual liberation has backfired in a lot of ways. And you would have me with you. But I don't understand why you got to go the extra mile and be, like, retarded about it. And I think that's what I was trying to say in that video in regards to, like, just even the perception of the take is cringe.
Yeah, it's super cringe. Especially you're implying, like, to some extent, like, she's like, men are aware that they could be drafted based on their vote. I'm like, no shot any man is thinking about, like, well, depending on who I vote for, I could be like, no man's thinking about that. And regardless of who he votes for, if something, like, as world, like, ending as a draft needs to happen because of some, like, major war, it doesn't matter who you voted for. The draft still has to happen. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's a conservative or, like, a Democratic or Republican versus Democratic leader. It's ridiculous. One thing I've noticed that's super interesting is that a lot of, like, conservatives and this red pill, especially this weird Tradcon pseudo-religious thing that's occurring right now, where, like, everyone who's they're advocating for Tradcon values, and they're using a lot of, like, Christian verbiage, but then they're also, like, super hedonistic. It's the weirdest movement I've ever seen.
Because their version of religion allows for hedonism for powerful men. So for them, it doesn't cost them anything, and then also gives them the most amount of access. So the worldview is actually super self-serving, and it works really well for them and their intentions. And it's a great medium by which to like gather a large audience, if you think about it. Because by aligning yourself with people who have these views and you're like anti-abortion, all this stuff, it's like, bruh, half of these dudes are out here fucking without condoms. If you don't think they're putting these bitches on birth control, or they don't have these women taking some form of something to avoid pregnancies, you are bugging. And so they can align themselves with all these views outwardly because it's like super profitable, but the way that they live their lives is completely antithetical to it. But it doesn't matter because the grift works well. So I understand it. But I just think if you sat down and really took the time to be introspective and be honest, you'd recognize that the way that they're living is completely bullshit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, one thing I've noticed about a lot of these communities is that they levy pretty decent criticisms at problem. They poke holes, like legitimate holes in the system. When they look at the institution, they point to things that I'm like, these are actually really valid criticisms of institutions, of women, of society. The problem is that the conclusions that they draw are insane and like, they're insane. They're asinine. They don't even make sense a lot of the time. Like a lot of the conclusions, right? Like, well, okay, the institutions are really bad. There's some corruption. Big pharma is corrupt. You know, there's been enough like issues with like Johnson and Johnson doing like crazy shit that it's like, yeah, big pharma is a very corrupt problem. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like every single medication that they put out is poisoning all of us at all times, or like mind control, or that they're intentionally giving us medication exclusively to just see how much we'll agree with their worldview and then take the drugs, you know? Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily turn you into bots.
When you went and experienced it for yourself and you saw it like firsthand, what were your thoughts that you were having as you were kind of unpacking this stuff and getting deeper into it? Because I know you went on podcasts, you've had a lot of conversations with these people. What is your biggest reservation outside of the fact that like their lifestyles are antithetical to what they're
like the Tradcon kind of weird movement?
Yeah.
The problem is that it's a movement that is unironically celebrating men at their worst in a lot of ways. Like the alpha type males, like the DJ Academics is like a really extreme example, but it is a perfect example of why there's a really big issue, right? Is that first of all, you had two men, mostly one man, like Sneeko was jumping in there. He wasn't going off like DJ. He was just like contributing, but you had like two men bullying a woman and three other men, alpha chads, these ripped dudes, right? They're all big, just sitting there and taking it and not doing anything about it. And then they spout things like protectorship and alpha and leading. And it's just like, none of this happened. In fact, all you did is make space for what I would argue is like, unironically, DJ Academics is a verbally abusive, very aggressive toward women man. And he's the archetype of the loser abuser, right? Who's afraid of other men, who kowtows anytime a man like even gives him a stink eye. And then he takes all the rage of all the men that he's afraid of out on women. And it's so pathetic. And the movement has actually unironically idealized him. Like it's crazy to me. Like that's the problem, is the internal inconsistencies.
Yeah. But I think most people are inconsistent, whether they like to admit it or not. And I think most of these movements operate on inconsistency. And so I just think it's extra hilarious when people claim to be logical and consistent. And then when you look at their movement, they just engage in a lot of the same tribalistic behavior where it's like, well, he's doing it to a woman and women kind of deserve it because women nowadays are out of order. And so like, you find ways to like either minimize it or accept it. But yeah, I think if you looked at it pretty objectively, you'd agree that was kind of loserish behavior. But yeah, even just the fact that all the guys kind of stood there and watched for so long and let it happen is an indication of the tremendous bias against ladies. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you and I now have both been on that show, and I would say like, obviously in different roles, you being like the man coming onto the show, and I was sitting around the table with the women, and it's a very, I mean, when you walk onto that show, it's very clear, like as a woman at least, that like you don't matter. You are a retarded child, and like sit down, shut up, and look good. Like we don't want to hear from you until it's time.
You didn't get that treatment though, did you?
I did at first.
Because you were a guest.
I did at first. They almost didn't let me on.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on the couch. And just to be clear, like I don't want to throw full shade on Fresh and Fit. Like they were mostly like, I'm gonna be honest, it was mostly their producer Chris. If anyone was gonna get shade thrown on them, it was Chris, right? Where like I wasn't really a guest. In fact, like I got sat on the couch when they realized that I wasn't Melina, because I thought it was Melina at first for whatever reason. And I was like, nope, this is Destiny's wife. So then they sat her next to him. And they're like, okay, you go on the couch. And I was like, hey, I'm the Canadian girl that's been messaging you for like months about this. I flew down and spent like 1.5 grand to be here. Like I can't, like, what are you doing sitting me on the couch? And then like Chris was like, oh, and then like put me up, which was good. I'm glad that they like, at least they could have just dismissed me as well.
Good for you, standing up for yourself. You said, I didn't pay all this money for fucking nothing. You better put me on this motherfucking seat. Talking about the casting couch. Good for you, Kyla. Proud of you.
Thanks. Yeah. Proud, empowering women one day at a time. But it was wild sitting at the table while they're giving us like the spiel. When the men are out, they're not around, they're like talking to Myron and stuff. And the way, especially like Chris talks to the women around the table was so infuriating for me as like a very, very, I mean, I'm a very confrontational woman, obviously. It like really, truly infantilized. He said, make sure your phones are on airplane. So I pull out my phone and put it on airplane and says, hey, this isn't fucking kindergarten. I don't want to be your teacher. Put your phone away. And I was like, so what do you want? Do you want it on airplane or do you want my phone away? Like, I got to pull it out to do that. It was kind of, I don't know if your experience was similar, if you were around when they were like prepping the women or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely know there's a hierarchy. You know who's a guest and who's, there to look good and be cannon fodder. So yeah, you definitely feel that for sure.
Yeah.
I just made sure that the way I talked to them was an indication of that, because at the end of the day, like me, doesn't matter who I'm talking to, I'm generally very respectful and cool with everyone I meet. And so for me, I just kind of kept that same energy. And so yeah, I definitely saw what you're talking about though.
Yeah, and to be fair, I will say actually Myron was really respectful of women through the whole process. In fact, like I never got any of that energy or fresh. He was like kind of dominantly one guy.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely been a shift, probably from like what it used to be like to where it is now. You know, so I think they've learned to manage their platform a lot better. So that's a good thing for the people showing up. Because I went on the earlier days. The earlier days are a little bit more wild. Not gonna lie, women get kicked out every single episode. You know, and I understand it because it's a bit of a crutch. You know, like when you start a channel or whatever, and you find something that works and it gets views, like you are incentivized to do it often and to engage into that kind of hostile behavior because it generates income. But I think they realized like it was just a bad look for them, and they also realized it's just bad for business, so they kind of cooled that. So that's good.
Yeah,
that's good. And I mean, anytime somebody can change a little bit and improve is always something worth mentioning. So yeah, because bad behavior is often incentivized on social media platforms. So
yeah, do you think that they improved? Because you guys had a bit of your war. So do you think that your guys' little tiff helped lead to any improvements for them? Because mostly over DMCA strikes, correct?
Yeah, part of it was on DMCA strikes, part of it was other things, but I think as you just spend more time on the platform and you go through things, you become better at navigating stuff. And so the more that you spend time on the platform and you have issues, you'd be like, all right, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with that. Is this good for business? And so you become smarter about how you navigate the spaces. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you become smart. You have to, because if you want to survive, you have to improve.
Right.
And I think that's how most people go about stuff. So would I say we contributed? Potentially, but I wouldn't probably take credit for it. I think that's probably self-reflection.
Yeah.
And then just learning.
Yeah. Okay. Are you a political person at all, or do you tend to? Because I don't know how much political commentary. I watch a lot of your guys' reactions to like Jubilee and The Cut and stuff. That's like my absolute favorite stuff. Would you consider yourself a highly political person at all? Like, do you stay connected to any of that world?
The political stuff, to some degree, I think if it's like peripherally interesting to me, or if I feel like it's relevant, then sometimes. But I don't think I'm too into it. It just becomes very like you start beat down by it, and it's just all encompassing. So I think after some time you get tired of just constantly consuming political news. So yeah, I think for me, I like humor. In my personal life, I like to laugh a lot. I'm always cracking jokes. So I'm like, I should make the channel reflective of like a lot of what we like doing, and a lot of it's like humor. We like clowning about stuff, but you know, every week or so, every week pretty much, we have like 2 videos generally that have more serious topics. So
yeah. Okay. Oh, my brain literally just went blank. I was just about to. What did you just say? There's something I was going to ask you about. Oh,
I just said that.
Comedian and yes, okay. Because you talked a bit about, based on watching their content a lot, you can kind of suss out whether somebody's a comedian or like Steven Crowder's not a comedian. He's a political commentator. Would you say that you occupy the space of comedian still, or are you more of like a sociocultural commentator?
I think that online people perceive us as commentators. I'm not mad at that because that's pretty much the only way we've really portrayed ourselves.
Yeah.
Even though we're constantly cracking jokes and we're doing entirely humoristic videos a lot of the times, there's definitely an element of us like just making social commentaries. So online, I don't mind if people view us through that lens. And so, yeah, I'm not too mad at people viewing me that way.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
It's not how I would define myself, but I understand why people would. So I'm okay with that.
Like, would you prefer to be defined as a comedian?
I think people online can define me as whatever they want. I think that I define myself more as a comedian, but people can define me because they only know me for one thing. It's like akin to like me defining myself as a dancer. I identify more with dancing than I do with social commentary, but I'm known for my social commentary. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the public perception is like irrelevant. Sorry, my perception of myself is irrelevant to how I move in the public sphere. You get me?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
I care more about dancing. I care more about comedy. I do more time spending those things than I do YouTube or whatever. But even though that's the case, online, I'm only known for one thing, so I'm good with that.
That's interesting. I didn't actually know that so are you still part of like a dance like crew, or do you teach, or what's your involvement in dance? Because I know you did dance in the past. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know you're still really involved with it.
Nowadays, I just basically mainly go out or I have practices at home all the time. And so that's like what I do. But yeah, I'm not part of any like dance crews or anything professional in that regards.
Okay.
Anymore.
Like you just, I don't know much about that world. How much time, because you said you actually spend more of your time doing comedy and dancing. So what does your like day-to-day look like? I think that I am actually surprised to hear that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So like for me, I'll have like sometimes 2 to 3 hour practices, or sometimes I'll go on nights out. Like I go out dancing maybe twice a week minimum, and then I have practices at home. And so like I'll go out Thursday nights, and then I'll also go out like on the weekend. And then I'll have practice at home either in skates or like off of them, and then just do some dance practice at home. So that's definitely a thing for me. And then for stand up, that was like 4 or 5 times a week. You go do mics or you do weekend shows, and you're going there pretty much every other night. So I spend more time doing that stuff and doing that than I do this.
Yeah. Did the YouTube career help your stand up as far as like notoriety, at least like people know who you are?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, so once the YouTube stuff popped up, everybody wanted to come see us live. And so when we did our tour in Canada and we did like a show, we did like 3 shows. So it wasn't like a full on tour of all across Canada, but we did like three cities.
Yes, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto.
Yeah. And then we sold out all locations.
The classic like, Dirty 3.
Yeah. And, sold out immediately. So like that was the first time we realized like, oh, this online shit's changing everything. So, yeah.
That's crazy. Have you gone across Canada yet, or have you just neglected Western
Canada?
No,
so
like the rest of you.
We're waiting to get the visa going. And so once the visa application's done, which I've been working on this whole fucking last month or so, once that's done, then I can move on to doing the whole like world tour.
Okay. Oh, world tour. Holy shit. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So States, Europe, Australia, where else are you going?
Do that. I mean, we're gonna go. I think that's pretty much a pretty strong cover. I don't think we're gonna go to Latin America.
Yeah.
Even though we got a lot of fans in Brazil, we're gonna spend more time in Europe. Maybe Australia. Not sure about that one because that bitch is far. And then definitely a lot of the time in America, UK, and then Canada as well.
Okay, interesting. Again, are you going to neglect Western Canada? That's like what I'm in Western Canada, and that's like our biggest gripe always with.
Wait, I thought you were in Toronto.
Nope, Alberta.
Where are you going? Oh, there's no way I'm going to Alberta.
I mean, I don't blame you with Alberta. Calgary, there's.
Why did I think you were in Toronto? Why did I think that?
Probably because you heard Canadian, and you're like, there's only one city in Canada that matters.
I could have swore you were in Toronto. I feel like we haven't argued about this.
Nope, I'm definitely not in Toronto.
Okay, so are you in Edmonton or Calgary?
I'm rural, so like the closest city is Edmonton, but I'm north of it. So
that's even worse. You're in the shittiest part of like Alberta, which is like
it's amazing. Like we get like northern lights all the time. We have snow right now.
Hey, listen, if you're happy out there, then all the power to you. It couldn't be me.
It's definitely hard to do collabs though. I will say, as somebody who does, because collabs pretty central to like live streaming, and I got to go a long ways to do any of that shit.
Yeah, I like being near people. I like culture. I like being able to go out and do stuff. So for me, it's like really important to be in a major city. So if you can handle that rural life, then shout outs to you.
I just think Calgary has a lot of like big time oilers, like big whales. There's so much money in Calgary. I'm surprised you're not going to Calgary. Like you could probably sell your tickets for a lot. Like Calgary is loaded. There's so many rich motherfuckers because all of our business and our oil sector went there. And Alberta is the only province that actually makes money. I mean, not literally, but
hard pass. No Alberta, no Manitoba. Just not even.
Okay, of course not Manitoba, but Vancouver, I'm guessing.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just on the way to go to Los Angeles. I'll just fly to Vancouver, then go down to Seattle or whatever. Like it's just easy. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. How much time do you have left? Because I have one other derail conversation, but it's probably a longer conversation, so I don't want to.
I mean, we'll see. What's the question?
I want to ask you about, basically, I want to think if you think white people are culturally more political than others, and then kind of, I just kind of want to ask you a little bit about that.
What do you mean more political than others?
I find that white people, I want to talk about white allyship specifically. I think white allyship is a very unique political expression that I don't really see culturally anywhere else, and some would argue for obvious reasons. And I'm curious to know. Oh, we just crashed. Oh, are we back?
No, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're back.
I'm curious to know what that experience is. So for context, my husband is part Jamaican and stuff. So, and I am like, I'll fully own, I am white as fuck. We did a DNA test and I'm like 98% like British French. And then I actually have a really high amount of Neanderthal in me as well. And like, if like Neanderthals were in like white Europa. So I'm just like the whitest motherfucker. But it's really interesting spending time with his Jamaican side of the family, especially. It's interesting to watch him because he's obviously mixed. And so he can like essentially code switch. And it's really interesting to kind of see that. And it's just, I'm the whitest of the whiter because I grew up in like Protestant, I grew up in WASP rural Alberta. And so it's a very different dynamic. And one thing I notice is that when we're with my family, the political conversations are a lot more, there's a lot more like pretense. Whereas when we're on his side of the family, I think his family is actually quite aggressively political, but there's way less pretense and it's a lot more, it's actually, I just find it way more enjoyable because we can just like shoot back and forth about like really spicy topics and it's fine. I'm curious. And they talk to me a lot about white allyship and like the issues that they have with it. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on it.
On white allyship specifically, or are white people more political?
I'll maybe start with like, I get a lot of white people telling me what I can say as a white person. And I don't know if that's the wisest thing for white people to be saying or doing.
What are some things that white people tell you can't say?
So in Canada, for example, I get a lot of white people telling me specifically terms that I need to refer to Indigenous people with. But then when I talk to like Native people, they almost exclusively always ask to be called natives. Almost always. And so that's an example, for example, that if I say the word like native, a lot of white people will probably even now email me and be really upset about that. But very few people within the actual group will have a problem with it, which feels like a little bit like this weird white gatekeeping other white people in a way that like the actual group that they're gatekeeping and protecting doesn't matter. Like the group that they're being an ally for doesn't care about that thing.
Yeah. I mean, from where I'm standing, and I think the intentionality behind it, I get it. I think that they just go about it incorrectly. But generally, I think those are pretty lame white folks, so I don't really spend too much time around them.
The white,
but I also don't like. Do they identify as white allies? So like, are they like?
I think that's the best way to characterize them. A lot of them, I think, actually will identify as white allies, but I think that's the best way to describe them because they're essentially kind of what they're trying to do.
Anybody who would qualify themselves as a white ally, I'd probably just cringe and walk away from. But that's just me. I don't spend time around people like that. That's so weird to me.
You just think it's like totally goofy, basically.
Yeah, like if anybody just openly said like, yeah, I'm like a social justice warrior, I'm like, you're not a real person. There's no way. I don't meet these people in real life, so I just couldn't imagine. I could see folks being like, oh, you shouldn't say that. I could definitely see that. I've probably seen that on my Facebook timeline at some point in the past.
Yeah.
But yeah, people like what would I say to these people who say stuff like that, or how should you feel about them? Is that I want to just make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, let's start there. I don't know if I don't have a clear question about this. I think the issue is I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I'm the type of person that thinks about things for a really long time and kind of waffles between multiple sides before I solidify where I fall. And so I'm just curious to kind of get your perspective, because I know my husband's perspective and his family's perspective. I know my white ally friends' perspectives, and I think you talk about this sometimes, so I'm curious on your thoughts.
I think if someone's just pointing out something to you very briefly and they're not being super condemning about it, I don't think it's that big of a deal. You know, it's like, I don't think Native people like being called that. I think we all do that to people around us. I've definitely heard friends be like, oh, the dykes are fucking each other. Yeah, I don't think you can say that. Am I being a lesbian ally, or am I just like letting you know, like, hey, this might be a faux pas?
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Right. There's a difference between those two things. So you'd have to first qualify what of the two it is. Is it someone like badgering you, or is it someone just telling you like that's a faux pas?
Yeah. I mean, do you know what I mean when like you're around, especially like these white ally types, and there's like this tension of pretense where like the whole time, I mean, you have this with everyone.
No. So you need to like lay down an example, describe the part, say, oh, what happened? Because I feel like you got a vision in your head and I need to know.
I actually don't. I have more. This is the liberal specter. The issue is that I think, to be honest, if I hadn't married my husband, I'm concerned that I would be that type. I wouldn't be the type who would call myself a white ally, because I think I'm like not that cringe, but I'm concerned that I would be the type like tone policing other white people about what like some person of color wants without ever having asked them, or like just letting people of color tell white people what they want. You know, like I feel like I need to be the bridger who like communicates this for them.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. I mean, unless the person is just dropping a bunch of N-bombs or going crazy. I think generally speaking, you can let white folks kind of do that for themselves. I
agree with you now. What I've just realized though is that like if I hadn't had the experience like with my husband and his side of the family, I think it's very easy for a lot of like basically like nice liberal white people to fall into this trap, because they're essentially, they just like are always worried about like it's the liberal specter. Like we're just always afraid of offending somebody and like stepping on the wrong toes and like being the big bad guy basically.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, white people can't say shit, so I'm not even mad at them for it. They'll say the one wrong thing and people blast you on Twitter talking you a Karen or whatever, or you a racist person. So, I mean, I think some of it probably comes from genuine concern. Some of it also comes from like being well-intentioned to some degree. I just always judge it based off of like the intensity of it. If it's just sort of like, I don't think you can say that. And it's a reasonable thing to like be like. The old Native thing was interesting because I've heard that too. I've heard like indigenous people is probably the better term. I've heard that. And when I've been told, it really doesn't bother me unless someone's like super insistent or being cringe about it. But if someone's like, you can't say stupid, or you can't say, because I was able, so I'm like, bitch, shut the fuck up. Right. And so if you ask me how I navigate that kind of stuff or how I would feel about it, I just really judge it on a case by case basis, which is kind of boring because it doesn't draw a straight line, but it is at least understanding of people who don't mean terrible and aren't actually wrong about what they say, because there could be terms that you don't know that are offensive. Right. You know, I always thought it was cringe when like people would say like, you know, I'm not racist. I've had a black girlfriend. Like, yeah, you know, if a white person would be like, yeah, that's kind of cringe. I'm not mad at them because it is. But as long as they're not like going hammering the person, I don't think it's an issue. So yeah. Yeah,
that's fair. I guess I find it quite frustrating. I find it actually infantilizing sometimes. Like I find it, now that I'm like more aware of it, and like, again, maybe I'm just borrowing this from like more of like, again, my husband's side of the family, but they'll always call it like the bigotry of low expectations, like how like white allies will like step in and advocate for things. And especially when they push for like, you know, these people need more grace, that we need to like, you know, lower. I think yesterday I was talking with somebody like, maybe we should like lower the standards of like certain grants for certain people groups so that it's easier for them to get like money. And it's like, and so like, we shouldn't make them have to write an essay because, you know, people of color won't have time. They've got too many intersectional problems going on that they can't like write an essay. And I'm like, do you not realize like how fucking racist that is? Like, what do you mean that somebody of color can't write an essay for this grant? What?
Are you being a white ally right now? Or are you not just saying something that's pretty true?
I think I'm being pretty true right now. I think the person that I was fighting with was being the white ally type of telling me like, we should try to protect, like it's with a good intention of being like, we realize there are intersectional problems, right? There are Native people in Canada have experienced horrific histories. They have actively had massive problems. They've been like stuck on reserves, underserved. Like these are all really true things, but I don't think the way that we best serve them is by like basically like expecting.
Wait, but what's the difference? Aren't you also being a white ally in that moment?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think you're literally the definition of a white ally at the moment.
Why?
But she might be wrong, whoever you're arguing with, but I think you are also a white ally in that sense. I don't think white ally necessarily has a negative connotation from what I understand.
I think it almost always does. Like I think at least in my perception, it's very cringe. But I guess that's the question. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, I think you see it as a pejorative of someone who's being condescending as a result. And so that's it. I don't think being like somebody, so like if you call yourself like an ally to black people, I don't think it's always done under the pejorative term like of you like looking down on black folks. I think it's just the idea of you wanting to ally yourself to the black cause and being an advocate for them. Now, what happens in reality might be very cringe oftentimes, but I think the definition of it is just somebody who wants to help out the minorities or whatever.
Yeah. So the issue is, I think all of it comes from good intentions, but I think good intentions can be like the pathway to hell. And sometimes good intentions like actually necessarily cause you to treat other people as like lesser because you are so willing to like coddle somebody, right? So like this is a frustration I get as a woman all the time, is like there's a bigotry of low expectation with women where like unironically sometimes people feel the need to fight my fights, which I appreciate. It's like it's not meant in a mean way, but the problem is that like if you really respected me, especially like somebody who does online political debate, you probably know that in most, at least like political speaking spheres, I can probably fight my own fights for the most part, right? And there's this experience.
Are you talking about white savior?
Maybe white savior is a better word then. Yeah.
I think it might be. I think that's the one that's pejorative, which I think always, yeah. Because white savior is essentially like talking about people who think they know better than the groups that they're advocating for. And so they kind of move into these spaces and try to save everyone. You can think of the white girl who goes to Africa to build homes and has no home building qualifications or whatever. Like, yeah, I think
they're like disconnected is a lot of what I experience. Like when I'm talking to these people that I'm calling white allies, they're usually advocating for things that they think are nice and good, but they're usually advocating for useless nonsense.
I think when it comes to people wanting to do these things, the condescension and the need to do this, I think, is something that I find incredibly annoying and off-putting. And generally, I've spoken about this before, where it's just like, I'd rather somebody just be straight up racist than try to do the whole white savior thing.
Yes. Yes. Okay. White savior and white allies feel the same to me when I'm talking about them. Like I think they're the same
from your perspective, because you don't realize that you are a white ally in a weird way, because you would advocate for minority groups in certain kind of situations. You just don't do it from a condescending place or a place of not knowing. So I think that's like the differentiation between the two. But being an ally to women wouldn't make me like some kind of hyper feminist who's like waiting to rape somebody or some shit. It just means that like women's got issues, and like it's fine to be able to advocate for them without being too cringy about it. And so I think it's just the one taking up too much space, which I don't think is a good thing. I think if you want to advocate for groups of people, you don't have to take up all the space. Make sure that they're the ones primarily talking about it. And two, just don't do so like super aggressively or ignorantly either. And so that's probably my prescriptions to anybody who wants to engage in that. Yeah,
like I don't know, how much time do you spend in like more like academic-y circles?
Never. Zero.
And this is why I'm talking about white allies, because they would never call themselves white saviors. They would never call themselves that, but they will call themselves like white allies for whatever it is, or like cis allies or anything. That's how they'll self-describe themselves. And it's like the main spaces where I get into really big fights, especially on like indigenous stuff, is in these academic spaces where I'm talking about things like chief tribal corruption. I'm talking about lack of drinking water and accessibility, lack of teachers and educators and stuff like this. The fact that like reserves are like basically still like run down almost third world zones within our first country. And they're like really fixated on being like, yeah, but you said this word instead of this word. And it's just like, God, you're so far from the point. Like, fuck, it's so frustrating. But yeah. Okay.
Anyway, if you encountering these people, I just traditionally just stay away.
I can't. I'm in the lab. I have to work with them. But yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think that's a bit different. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Those annoying types I just avoid having political discussions with, because I find it too cringy. So I don't listen to them. I've had like white women try to lecture me about oppression. I'm like, bitch, I ain't listening to nothing you got to say right now. So, and white women are especially the biggest peddlers. I'm not gonna lie.
They're
Yeah. And I don't know why. And some people are like, yo, Adam, you got a prejudice against. I do. You know what? And I don't even know if it's unfair, but I feel like I have a bias against them. But it's also because a lot of my personal experience are colored by it. Like, I don't know what it is. I didn't see too many white women cry in my lifetime, and I've lost all interest in their tears, and I have zero empathy. I think that's probably why I'm even biased against Lav. I mean, it's just.
Wait, what about me? Because I'm a white woman too. Do you think
yeah, but I haven't seen you exhibit any of that annoying ass behavior, you know, or you know, the redacted name. It's just like, bro, you know, all the most weird orbiters around this dude. It's just like, bro, it's been consistent pattern in my life. I don't know what it is. And I think that's a funny line that Sneeko said, but like Lav is super proficient at playing the victim. I really think that's true for a lot of ladies. And I also think that white women make the most sympathetic victims. And I think they subconsciously or consciously know this, and so they play that shit up. Because it doesn't make sense. Even if I take the percentage basis of like population sizes, it makes no sense to me. The white women are crying so fucking much over nothing a lot of the times. Like that shit really, and I grew up in a family with like 4 sisters. I saw my little sister cry at Mother's Day. I never saw them cry. And then I get online or I start dating. I'm just like, bro, I didn't know women could cry this much.
Is it the crying that's the problem, or the fact that when they cry, like when I love when Destiny's community calls it alting, because because I actually think not only is it an alt in most places, like I genuinely like I also tend not to cry into this space too much, but that's like in part probably because I have a bit of like toxic relationships to emotions. Right. Like I kind of say like I engage in a lot of toxic masculinity myself sometimes, but like when I look at white women, the problem isn't the crying by themselves. It's the fact that like the cry can be weaponed and bludgeoned, and there's an entitlement. Like I'm crying, so now you have to yield to my feelings. Because it's like the tears by themselves isn't a problem, right? Like if I was talking with a guy and he started crying, or anyone else, most of them wouldn't expect me to pause the conversation, cater to their feelings, and then continue on. Whereas I think with a lot of women, but especially white women, if there's feelings coming up, they're like, hold on, all of the world should stop. I'm having feelings right now. And it's like, well, that's not really how this works. Like your feelings are fine. They could be here. You can cry, but that doesn't mean that the conversation has to stop necessarily.
I think most men can differentiate between manipulative forms of crying and crying that seems to be coming from an earnest place. And so there are times that I've seen women cry that I don't feel that kind of repulsion or disgust. And there's other times where I'm like, your feet are at the fire and all of a sudden you're crying like crazy. I feel like you're trying to turn the tables. Like this look a little bit sus. There's no reason. And then other times I'm like, okay. And I just notice, for whatever reason, just by the frequency of it, it feels extremely manipulative the way that I've seen a lot of white women cry. I lose all interest. In fact, I start laughing because I'm like, here it comes, guys. You know, the whole alting thing makes me laugh every single time because I'm like, bruh. So I don't know. I have a bias there, and that's something I'm very cognitive. But I do feel like it's warranted because that kind of manipulative behavior is super powerful. And I think in a society that prioritizes people being victims and like emboldens them and empowers them, that crying is one of the best ways to instantly turn yourself into a victim in a conversation and garner sympathy from everybody. Yeah. Doesn't matter what you did. Doesn't matter how bad you've been, whatever it is. If you start crying in public, everybody will come to your defense because they see some girl in distress. But I feel like white women are keenly aware of this fact and they use it instantly when they need it. Well, it's just absurd to me how often it happens.
Well, this is the crazy thing, right? Like if you watch podcasts, for example, and you see like a black woman cry, which first of all, almost never happens. But when you see it, nobody's rushing to her. Like it actually seems to be distinctly like, I don't know if it's exclusively white women, or I think it's probably to some extent people really don't care about black women, but like, man, it's crazy. Yeah, it's just crazy when you see.
It's cultural. It's cultural. So like, for example, I know this to be true for a lot of immigrant families. Like if you're in an immigrant family and you start crying as a kid, they still gonna whoop that ass.
Yeah.
So like at a young age, you're just taught that your tears are not a tool you can use in these dynamics.
Yeah.
You don't learn that at home.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it is more so cultural than anything else. And I think also a lot of it is public perception. You know, like we all know the fact that, you know, based off of like studies that they've done in regards to like dolls and things like that, whether it be pretty or sympathetic or who's a kind person, who's not, we have certain biases that are ingrained in us at a like visceral subconscious level, right? Yeah. Wait, just out of curiosity, you probably know about these studies. So are any of them faulty or are they?
Sorry, which specific studies?
I'm talking about the doll city. Remember the doll thing that they did, the doll experiment?
Oh yeah, with the book, and they're like it's crying, and then whether they tell you if it's a boy or a girl, they read whether it's crying or angry. That one?
Yeah, or they define like whether or not the doll was beautiful based off of like the skin tone change.
Oh yeah.
Right? Okay. So what I'm trying to say is like we have a lot of these subconscious biases. So it's not just that whether no one's going to be a good victim. It's like also societally speaking, we just view them as better, more sympathetic victims.
Yeah.
And so that's a subconscious bias that we have inside of us.
Oh, is that the one where the kids have like the spectrum of color skins and they ask which kid's the bad kid and they always usually point to the black
yes,
child?
I think at some point they move towards that one. Yeah.
Okay, if you want to know another crazy study between boys and girls, there's this study that they did in developmental psych as well, where they had a storybook with basically animal characters, and basically they would tell the parent that it was a boy or a girl main character as the experiment. And as they go through it, the main character gets really upset and has a lot of feelings at one point. And when they would ask the parent to talk to their kid about what feelings that character was having, if the little character, obviously same book, if the character was labeled as a boy, they'd be like, look at this character's super angry and upset. Look how angry and mean he is. And if it was a little girl, they'd be like, look, she's crying, she's sad, which is like so telling. Like it's crazy.
Yeah. I think the way that these things permeate within us, like subconsciously, affect a lot of our outward behavior. And so I think subconsciously, I think a lot of people understand these things, at least in terms of how they behave. And so, yeah, when you ask me about crying or any of this stuff, or like these people and why I'm like biased against them, I am biased against them, but I think it's also reinforced by the fact that like some of their behavior does appear to be manipulative. So I don't feel bad about my bias most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's generally like keenly sensitive to the fact that these people are actually doing bad shit.
Yeah, and I think the trick is that like a lot of people would fight me on this, but I think like right now, one of the most like privileged groups on the planet is attractive young white women. Like unironically, I think like they have both enough like basically intersectional armor to like shield them from certain levels of accountability, but because they're still like more or less, they have all the pretty privilege. They're still like more or less viewed as like the light skin bias. They're still like in the more dominant like culture as well. They tend to be a lot more educated. They just like also have like insane amounts of privilege, which I feel like nobody like you can't. I'm sure that I'll get some shit on for even saying this, but yeah, it's just it's crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting because as I've gone into like my personal experiences kind of reinforce that bias, but I think as I've gone on the online space, I've seen what you're describing be exponentially more prevalent in terms of like online scandals and things like that. Like, yeah, I see it all the time. And so, yeah, that's probably something about myself that I've come to acknowledge over time. And I don't know if I'm apologetic or feel bad about it. I just try to be aware of it and see if it makes me have some bad takes. But yeah, I'm keenly aware of my bias.
I think a part of the issue is internet women seem to be a very unique breed. Like internet, do you know what I mean? Because like when I'm talking about this, I then think about like the majority of my friends, which are like, to be honest, most of my friends are white, younger, attractive women. And like none of this is actually really true about them though, but they're not internet. Like they don't know the first thing. Like when they say, what are you doing for a living? And I say, have you heard of Twitch? They go, no, I've never fucking heard of Twitch, right? They're like, is that like TikTok? And it's like, no, it's not like TikTok. And they're oftentimes not like this. Like I don't find them as much to be like bludgeoning people. There definitely seems to be this unique intersection of like internet space within, probably because of social algorithms. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like mental illness drives people to the internet more than onto grass. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. I think the space that they occupy online, and I'm not too critical of it because I don't mind even if these biases are working in their favor. I think just watching how they operate online and the way that they're able to garner sympathy so quickly on any kind of situation is like really interesting to watch because you're seeing it happen on like a times X scale, right? Like before it's just in person, you see the people around, you see the friends, whatever it is. Then I see motherfuckers online, it's just like, damn, this is instant. Like the whole internet is behind this. So I don't know. For me, a lot of times when these scandals happen or these things break down, I have to fight myself to not be instantly against the person because I'm like, I done had the wool pull over my eyes so many times, I just don't buy it. And I even think like in large part when the Johnny Depp thing happened, I think the 95% of why she became such a sympathetic figure is precisely because of her skin tone. Obviously,
And
like
pretty,
the gender
being
aspect
pretty
of it.
as well.
Yeah, she looks like she should be a sympathetic victim.
Yeah.
Like that's what she looks like. It wasn't until like people realized there was an ugly face underneath it all and an incredibly manipulative person that people were like, what? But I wasn't surprised because I didn't seen that stuff in my personal life before.
Yeah.
And so yeah, seeing it happen on a grand scale on trial and everybody's buying into it was like, yeah. I don't think people realize the ways in which her racial aspect definitely plays into to that. But I don't try to harp on it too much because it's very difficult to talk to people about subconscious biases or things like that because I think it just turns into like, are you saying I have something in me that I can't even see myself, but that you can see? I'm like, I'm saying we all have some of that in ourselves. It's the reason why, as a black man, if I'm walking in the neighborhood and I see other black dudes, I myself might even cross the street depending on where I'm at and what time of day it is. But if I saw 5 white girls, I probably wouldn't. We have those biases, whether they're conscious or subconscious, and they exist in us. And so they color the way that we look at a lot of these issues, whether we're cognizant of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I think about a lot with this, like, especially this like white women stuff, is the transition that occurs to a woman's value the moment that she becomes old. Because I think Amber Heard wasn't just a pretty white woman. She was a young, pretty white woman. Like she appeared young, right? Whereas like, I wonder what public perception would have been if she appeared old, like older at least. She didn't have the markers of youth. Because like, damn, like one of the main things I think about this is like a feminist critique that I actually like really agree with and value, which is that like a woman's value, especially like a white woman's value, can be really high if she's pretty. And then the moment she begins to be perceived old, it's not even like people like don't respect her anymore. She doesn't even exist. Like, is she even a human anymore? Like, it's just like nobody cares about old women, like at all. Like, this is why like a lot of these red pill guys, they'll talk about women and like in these red pill spaces, damn, like 28 is old, and it's just like I'm not really old. Yeah, which is like crazy, and probably like I can't imagine. I mean, it makes sense why so many women are like constantly fleeing the markers of age, right? Because they know that if they start showing their age, that their value is immediately cut in half within society, which is like
that's always been true. That's always been true. Women's ages always mattered, and I would argue that today it matters less than it did in the past, but it's always mattered.
But is that because you can use cosmetic surgery and stuff to maintain youth?
No, I just think that today, I think the need for young women for reproductive purposes is
I see.
relevant. Right? Like the reason why you wanted young wives before is because they could bear children, and you needed them to bear many children because a lot of your kids were going to die. And so it's just normal to want youth in a woman because that's the most useful thing, right? And so that's normal in ours today. Obviously, people have higher life expectancies. People are not having kids near as much. They're getting married for completely different reasons, and so the reasons that they need a partner are different. Now, still, the markers of age help with beauty, but beyond that, I don't think it's nearly as like relevant as it used to be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm understanding what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's the final thoughts that I have.
Awesome. Good. I'm glad we could finish it on hating on white women. This is perfect. No, I'm just playing. I just hate some of them.
Just most of them. How much work do you think I had to do to overcome your implicit bias?
I don't think you have to do much work. It's not like I meet every white girl and I get. There's plenty of them in this space that I actually enjoy talking to, and they're cool. There's just certain behaviors that I see, and I just get so like, here we go. And I ask myself that sometimes, like, do I hate this person, or like, do I have a strong dislike for this person for unfair reasons? And then I think about, like, no, these are completely valid, and I will hold on to them to my dying breath. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure if this has happened yet, but it feels like people are becoming more and more open to others. Like in the past, if you said I had an implicit bias towards white women, like you would have been crucified. Like there wouldn't, and I'm imagining you still don't get like only love for that, but there's a lot more space for like acknowledging these implicit biases. Do you think there's going to come to a space where we like go like, yeah, like sometimes people are just like a little bit racist, and it's not good, but it's like better to acknowledge it.
No, you want to know what happened? You want to know what happened? This is the big turning point where it became socially acceptable to say this. You want to know what happened?
Yes, I do.
White men turned on white women. everything. Even white dudes are throwing white women under the bus. Like, man, these bitches are driving me insane, bro. And I'm like, hey, my white brother, come over here. We started hugging, and we're like, man, they put a rape charge on me too, right? So all of a sudden, we started finding like a linking ground. Like, man, hey, listen, that's why me and Destiny get along so well. Half the time, we just talk shit about white ladies, you know what I mean? So you realize the game has changed. Everything has changed from there. I mean, I see white comedians openly talking about, man, why would we get on my fucking? I'm like, yeah, talk that shit. And so, you know, and everybody knows white dudes control everything. So I mean, that's just where it's at.
Especially if they're rich, right?
Yeah,
rich white dudes have controlled the world forever, and they still do.
Yeah, so I don't, you know, things are a little bit different nowadays. But no, it's just. There's a certain level of like entitlement and desire to change the world, and then also aggressively playing the victim and cobbling all these things together. That's just so unsightly, you know. Yeah. On one hand, you do everything, and on the other hand, you're just crying and over minor criticism. Like, I can't take it seriously. And I think one thing I've noticed is, like, as I've spent time talking to Destiny and watching the streams, is that normally the kind of women he interacts with are the kind of women I'm describing. Well, not all of them, but just some of them, right? There's like, for example, like if you have a conversation with Lord Southern, I don't see her that way. If he has a conversation with Tree of Logic, I don't see her that person at all. Stardust, all these other people, I don't like have an issue. So I know it's not all of them, right? But then he keeps around these other crazy people that are like often on. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, bro, if this is real life, I would just delete this person's numbers, block them, but I gotta like be subjected. So like all those feelings of like, oh, here comes the alting. Oh, here comes to this. Like, oh, I forgot what this was like. And so this helped me resurface a lot of that dislike. Because in my personal life, I don't deal with it. Because anybody starts to look like that, I keep it pushing. And so, yeah, it's been interesting being in the streamer space because then I've had to be subject to that again. So.
Okay, here's actually, so Lav, this was a criticism Lav gave me. And I think it's really interesting. And I can't decide what I think about it.
The professional button-up thing?
Wait, what?
Well, she said you were professional. She said you were professional and buttoned up or whatever.
Well, I think what she's really saying is, in this space, a lot of the women that get listed as being based are women who often occupy decently masculine styles of like conversing. They tend to be decently aggressive. They'll kind of throw verbal punches, but they'll take verbal punches and kind of laugh it off too. Like it's okay with them. Right? They tend to just like, they tend to be pretty reduced in the amount of like emotionality that they express, right? They don't really cry very often. If anything, they'll show like more of the anger and aggression. And so Lav's critique was being like, I get that like you're being more accepted in this space, but I'm concerned that the main reason you're doing that is because like the rigid role of what women can be online right now is like 1/10 of what women really are. And I don't think she's...
Well, I don't think she's wrong, but at the same time, I don't think that her way of engaging conversations are good in any form. So for me, it's like, is a more traditional masculine frame of approaching these conversations better and it makes you more like? Probably. I would agree with her assessment. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't like the idea that you can escape accountability whenever you want because of frailty. I don't like the idea that you get coddled because like everyone's trying to pussyfoot around your feelings, like in a lot of more female-oriented spaces. Like, I'm not trying to see that shit. If you want to be in these spaces having difficult conversations and you have to adopt a more professional or a more masculine kind of temperament, I'm cool with that. But, you know, I don't think that's a bad thing. When I go to Parliament and I'm watching people take political discussions, I don't want to hear people like, well, my feelings this, or, you know, yesterday I wasn't thinking, that's why I made that. Like, no, if you're going to be in these spaces and have these kind of discussions, you should adopt that kind of temperament. The same way, within a relationship dynamic, there may be a desire or a need for you to adopt a maybe more empathetic, more patient, more understanding, more affectionate temperament, which is more female-oriented. Different spaces require each individual to bring forth a different thing. If you don't understand that, then you're not somebody who's very good at being an adult, in my opinion.
Right. I kind of, when I've talked to a couple of different people who have agreed with Lav and been talking to me in like DMs especially, I've kind of outlined it as like, to some extent, I agree that there is less value for feminine traits on the internet, right? Like being high empathy, high accepting, just like a warm individual. It seems like that's not, like it's valued in a way that people like, she's so sweet and cute, we love her, but it's not like respected, for example, right? Like I think about somebody like Lily Pichu. I think she emphasizes a lot of these like much more hyper feminine traits, like being very kind and soft and warm and accepting and just like silly and lighthearted. And people really like Lily. I mean, people, DG fucking loves Lily Pichu, but I don't know if anyone respects her capacity to actually communicate and show everyone around her that she's like willing to basically see them, accept them, and be like okay with where they're at. And she's really cool in that like she's willing to do that even with Destiny, who's like a really spicy thing. And so she like sticks to her levels of value of being like, I can even value and accept and see Destiny complexly, despite the fact that most of her social circle kind of rejects Destiny. And people don't respect her for it.
I disagree. I think the fact that she's a loyal friend or that she's somebody that sticks by Destiny is probably something that people really love a lot. I think the reason why she doesn't get much flack isn't necessarily because of the fact that, you know, she's not exhibiting annoying behavior, whatever. It's just like based off of her temperament, she understands that certain discussion or debate spheres, her temperament doesn't work well in. I'm absolutely confident that if she started getting into debate stuff and was engaging in the same behavior, she wouldn't be liked.
Yes.
She wouldn't be liked, right? But her temperament works for what she does. And so it's not that her temperament's not good for online streaming. There's plenty of female streamers who use the right temperament for the right kind of audience, for the right kind of discussion. I'm just not trying to hear frailty in strong political discussions. I'm not trying to hear like, I'm being so empathetic and like your feelings. When someone's just like escaping accountability all the time, it just sounds very manipulative. And so I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I reject the notion that it's a bad thing. You should probably adopt a more traditionally masculine frame when you are in a professional political setting. That's absolutely true.
Yes, and it's kind of the idea like when you're in Saudi Arabia, you're going to cover your hair, obviously, as a woman. Like you respect the culture that you move into. I guess what I'm wondering is when I look at women trying to come into the debate space and engage in any level of femininity, it seems like the only way they know how to be like assertive and intense and like deal with the space is to move into like toxic feminine traits, right? And it's like nobody wants any of this toxic behavior. Even if a guy was on stream, like other than like a couple of guys who were like literally known as just like Haz, who's just like known for like screaming profanities and insane. And that's why he's like kind of valued. But it's like, I don't know how many of his viewers watch it because they're like, I respect him. I think a lot of it watch him because they're like, he's entertaining to me. I don't think a lot of women have a script for how they can engage in like intellectual wrestling and political topics, but still maintain some elements of like their feminine, like of feminine pieces. And I'm not sure that I'm convinced that in the debate political sphere that it must necessarily be like just dominantly masculine traits. Like I think the problem is that when women come into it, they either become like toxic men or they become like toxic women. They don't really know how to do both very well.
I don't think you have to be toxic either. I think you can just keep it more so professional and understand like the limits of what you're good at. You know, like I don't think it has to be one or the other. I don't think even the toxic part of guys engaging in this space is also rejected a lot of the times. And so I think of dudes like Infrared.
Yes.
Is that the one? Is that the one who's like a communist?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Same
okay,
one.
so I've seen him briefly, but he's pretty much hated. And I don't think it's just because of that. I think his temperament is very detestable.
Yes.
And is that a hyper masculine temperament? Probably like this kind of hard headed, boneheaded, just like unable to like see ground on anything and just be completely like fucking social retard. Yeah, people don't like that either. And so there's ways in which both extremes can manifest, but I would argue that a more traditionally male frame is better. Now, in terms of keeping your femininity, what would that look like in your opinion? When you say
exactly, I don't know. That's exactly what I mean. But just because we don't know doesn't mean that it's not possible. That's my question. That and the problem is I'm the worst fucking person I think to do this because I typically occupy much more masculine personality styles as far as my engagement. And I totally agree with you about the Haz thing. I agree. People don't like toxic on either side, right? And I think a lot of things that get lumped into being like masculine or feminine are actually more about maturity, right? Like there's childish behaviors and there's mature behaviors. And then there's feminine behaviors and there's masculine behaviors. And these things are all a little bit different, right? So like professionalism isn't a gendered thing. It's exclusively a maturity thing.
Can I ask, what is this like femininity that like Tree of Logic or Lord Southern lack?
I won't speak for Tree of Logic. I've watched very little of her content, so I don't want to speak at all for Tree of Logic because maybe she's figured it out. I don't know.
Yeah. So what is this femininity that like Lord Southern lacks?
I wonder if a lot of these political debate spheres would do better I actually think this is part of, I'm going to be honest, I think Steven does this the best of anyone. He balances the feminine and masculine a fair bit in his debate style. And I think that's why he's so good. Like, for example, the fact that he gives maximal good faith and seems to maintain high levels of like empathy and essentially like emotional space for his interlocutor for as long as he can is a really good thing. It's why he's so above the board. And that feels like a bit of like, now this could just be a self-report, but like I feel like when I'm tapping into that part of me, it feels like I'm tapping into the more feminine parts of me. And I think that that's something that I don't see Lauren Southern doing, for example. I don't think I even do it perfectly.
What, she doesn't have like a lot of empathy or stuff like that?
And engages in like excellent superior levels of like good faith, of like giving the benefit of the doubt.
I mean...
But maybe this isn't a feminine thing.
No, I don't think these people are like, doing things in bad faith or not, being charitable to some degree. My experience, at least listening to them briefly, has been completely opposite. I would argue. Oh, bye-bye. So if I still...
You know what it is? Oh, sorry.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I think I realize what it is, what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Being feminine in a debate is saying yes and instead of no, but. And what I've noticed in Steven's style is what he often looks for with his interlocutor is areas where they agree and he can build on versus just rejecting what they're saying outright and then disagreeing with, and then like basically outlining where we disagree more clearly. Do you know, is that making sense what I'm saying?
Okay, so just giving space to like understand. I reject that notion because I think I see a lot of dudes try to understand the other person's positions very well. Like you'll see some guys argue obstinately or do the whole thing where they're going to be uncharitable. But I see so many guys just be like, all right, explain that. Let me understand a little bit better. I don't think that's necessarily what I would consider a feminine trait, trying to be understanding.
I guess I think it is. I just think it's okay that it's a feminine trait because I think like people can occupy both. Like what's unique about like especially Steven's new style of debating is that he to some extent is willing to hold his interlocutor's hand a little bit and not just jump down their throat the moment they say like something wrong. But doing your best to understand what someone is saying and what somebody is trying to say versus just like attacking them at their words exclusively and like focusing on like the elements of like the actual debate.
Yeah, no, I don't accept that. I think trying to understand people and then being considerate of like where they're trying to come from and get to the bottom of that, I don't think is what I would consider a traditionally feminine trait. But I mean, if you think that's like being empathetic and trying to understand, I guess you can make that argument. But I don't know, I see so much of it in the sphere and like in live stream discussions and trying to understand each other. I think that's more just an indication of being like decent at conversations and understanding the basis of like things. But if you view that as like an empathy skill and traditionally more feminine, then I guess I could agree. But I don't know. I just see so many dudes do it. I don't know why that would be considered traditionally masculine or hard to achieve in this space and to be like rejected. I feel like if any woman made an effort to try to understand someone's perspective, they wouldn't be looking like, oh, here comes a woman or here comes that feminine side or be biased against them. Like people like, oh, she's capable of having good conversations.
Yeah. That's fair. I'm still trying to figure this. This is why I'm saying I don't know if I have the right answer. I think one thing I really appreciate about Lav is she brings things up in a way where I'm like, that's a really interesting critique. I'm trying to figure out if it's true, if it's a good critique, like truly, and if there's a conclusion that we can come to from it. So it's possible that what I'm viewing as like the feminine pulling in is actually more of just a maturity thing, which seems like kind of what you're outlining. So I can kind of because I'm still working through this myself.
I think that I think what makes you appealing is that you've been able to substantially focus in on the topics at hand and then not interject with your feelings all the time or just seem spineless when pushed back against. I think when I look at people like Lav, I don't have to rehash old stuff. It's listening to somebody who has very aggressive and intense stance and then walks it back and then re-owns it. And it just seems like there's an escape of accountability for things that's super slimy and just uninteresting for me. And it speaks more to that whole crying nature. It's that same idea of like, I'm going to cry so nothing I did really matters anymore. That's why Redacted's name always really annoys me because like that's what she looks like to me too. You know what I mean? Someone incapable of taking accountability and then just manipulating others. So, using frailty or like I'm young or I hate that kind of, and it makes me really want to tune out and like reject a person entirely. So I don't think those are traditionally feminine. Actually, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of guys who make that stance. I would just say for women to be good in this space, is what makes men traditionally good in this space, but maybe there's a little bit more space for men to be fuck ups in this regards. But I think it's just knowing what you know, and then also, if you go get spicy, don't run away from it afterwards or be a bitch about it. Own that shit and then like die on that, because if you just look like somebody who's constantly trying to escape the spice that you're starting, then whether you're a man or a woman, the people are going to just look at you like a flip flop. So yeah. And I think that's also true for like Mr. Go. I think people watch the way that he engages in conversation and feel like he's very slimy, and the way that he does like the whole manipulation and stuff like that. I don't think that's unique to the women in the space. I just think the women in the space get treated a certain type of way and inherently attribute it to misogyny. And maybe some of the criticisms of the way they're voiced are misogynistic in nature, but they're generally pretty well deserved. I think when a woman comes in and she does her thing, even if it's different, I don't feel like Trio's Logic and Lord Southern are the same, but they both get a lot of love, or like, some other female orbiters or whoever it might be that comes in space, they get love. I don't think it's because they're trying to navigate this space to appeal to men or whatever. I think just the way that they do things, most people would think it's ethical,
right?
The right way.
And it appeals to the culture. Do you have time for me to read? I've gotten a couple more super chats, and I told the super chatters I would read it out. So there's questions for you.
We'll speed past them. Give it
rapid fire. Okay. Can you ask Abba if he thinks that governments are dumb people down? That governments dumb people down on purpose? As someone that grew up in extreme poverty here in Brazil, that seems to be the case. Do you think governments dumb people down on purpose?
I think that's so general. It's kind of hard to say for sure. I think sometimes governments are not incentivized to make their population super educated because financially it serves them. Depending on where you live, there's definitely a case to be made for that. That the reason why education is not prioritized in a lot of places is partially because, like, what's the point? Like, it doesn't really benefit us, and we're gonna win again next year, so fuck it. But I don't think that's a truth everywhere. So
okay. What is your opinion on Mike Hunters?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, based. Ask Abba, and does he think a conversation with Poor Man's podcast and Destiny would be fruitful? And also, what about, all right, let's start with that one. Do you think a conversation with Poor Man's podcast and Destiny would be fruitful?
Sure. I mean, if Destiny's still going through his like Redpill arc and wants to talk to dudes about dating and stuff, then I'm sure it'll still be useful. He runs a cool channel. So. Okay.
What about PMP and me?
PMP, who's that?
I have no idea.
Oh, Poor Man's podcast. Oh,
PMP.
Yeah, Poor Man's podcast. Okay, yeah, I think you'd enjoy the conversation.
Okay. I've never heard of Poor Man's podcast. Is it a Red Pill?
Are you going on No Jumper again?
I never went on No Jumper. I'm just stupid. Wait, do you know this? Wait.
I know this.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're trolling me. I'm so embarrassed. I'm mortified.
You should go on No Jumper.
The first time I fucking trend on DGG Reddit, and it's my massive fuck up. I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Shout outs to you and your No Jumper interview. Okay, what's the next one?
Okay, let's scroll up. I think there's one somewhere in between here. Oh yeah, nope, that's just my two favorite DGGers. It's kind of weird that people keep calling you a DGGer because your platform's literally bigger than Steven's.
It's all good. I don't mind it.
Yeah, I've realized Orbiters it's no longer a term for people who just like Destiny's helped start the career. That's what it started as. Now it's just the cast of players this year that are on the Destiny stream stage, fighting all the time and creating content.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I mean, hey, to me, it really doesn't bother me whatsoever because I know I got my own thing, so like, it makes really no difference to me. And ironically enough, it was interesting. I like talking to Destiny, like me and him talk offline. We're cool, we're friends in that regards. But ironically, I feel like this is mostly, in terms of like finances and career-wise, mostly a benefit to him. Because people, and I've noticed this spike a lot in my YouTube analytics, but now when people say they watched me, when I go look at the statistics, one of the other channels they watch a lot are Destiny. And so, if it's funneled viewers to him, a lot of my fans say like, I found Destiny through Abba and stuff. I'm very happy because I think he does good stuff. So it's good to have a leftist voice kind of gain prominence. So from my perspective, I think it's mostly financially beneficial towards him. Yeah. But I mean, I don't really care too much about that because I just enjoy the talk. So I'm cool.
Yeah. I mean, you don't even stream. You just come on to have fun and throw shade and win the Infinity Wars. Yeah. Do you have a favorite orbiter?
I don't think so. No. I have ones I dislike, and then the ones I'm just like pretty
chill
like,
with.
I'll listen to this person. Exactly.
Okay.
So I can't think of one, but maybe they'll come to mind.
Do you think that it would be fun to have a part 2 of Orbiter Wars? And what do you think the fight would be between?
Oh no, I don't think it. I think it's cool entertainment for people.
Yeah.
I think this one was only interesting to me just because I wanted to see the bridge burned, and so that's why I was keenly invested. And now that it's burnt, I really don't care. I think there's been a part 2, 3, and I haven't watched any of it.
Yeah. Thoughts on cultural appropriation? I think it's silly that people get so upset about white people dreads and using black slang, etc. Cultures blend naturally. Was it appropriation for Eminem to rap?
I think the whole idea of cultural appropriation holds some validity. I think the idea that black women can rock box braids or whatever, or braids in general, and then all of a sudden, Kim Kardashian or a more famous white person rocks it, and then all of a sudden it's a new fashion trend. Is kind of like annoying because it's like, oh, this came from this culture, but now it's put on a more sanitized thing. This is kind of like I remember in the Elvis Presley movie, there was like a revelation that a lot of people didn't know, that Elvis didn't like make his own songs. They would just take them from other black creators and then give it to him. Mm-hmm. And that it's basically stolen music. And that was like the sanitizing of the music. It appealed to a wider audience. And so there is like a case there to be like genuinely upset by the fact that, oh, if you put a white face on, all of a sudden it's more marketable. Yeah, right. I can understand why people would be pissed off about that.
Yeah.
And I also think that when it comes to making a career out of a cultural movement that isn't your own, that there's a certain way about going about it to not be disrespectful for the place it came from, because as an outsider, sometimes you're given opportunities that like the locals wouldn't be given. And that can be very upsetting. So for example, imagine if you walked into like a underprivileged neighborhood and all of a sudden you're being offered 30,000 loans to run businesses that none of the locals can get. Yeah, they won't feel some type of way. They've been there their whole lives. All of a sudden you move in and you can get it because you have to, like, that'll piss some people off. So there's a legitimacy to that. What I don't like is this idea of seeing a white woman with braids and be like, bitch, fuck you, or you're a piece of shit racist. Like, I don't endorse that kind of stuff. But I think there's a conversation to be had about the ways that the dominant culture can be exploitative of other places. And that's fine. But I don't care when I see Halloween and people are wearing these, like, I don't care about shit like that.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's
that's an interesting take. I don't think I've ever heard anyone give precisely that take before, because I think you put into words more eloquently what I've thought about for a while, which is that, yeah, there's elements of like cultural transaction. That's totally fine. It just happens when cultures are around each other. And that's not something to be upset about. The problem is like you said, with like Elvis Presley, or a really big phenomenon recently was on TikTok. There was a bunch of TikTok dance creators. You might actually be more familiar with this since you're in the dance community as well, where there's a bunch of black dancers that were creating dances and movements to different songs. And then white creators would fully rip off the entire dance. It would trend way more. They would never give original credit to the original black dancers who made it up. And then they'd act like shocked and be like, what do you mean? I just happened to make the identical dance too.
Yeah.
And that is exploitative, because then basically you're right. You're just painting a white face on the same thing and you're making more money from it too.
Yeah, I think in that case, it might be a different. You'd have to look at like, what kind of fan base did this person have? Was it far larger than the black creators or whatever it might be? Stealing someone's choreography, that's a bit intense. Because I think choreography.
I've seen full skits. There's this one girl that I was calling out on TikTok where there was I don't know if you ever saw the skit. It was three black guys, and they do like this thing with like a milk jug where they like smash a milk jug over their friend. And then there's like, I can't even remember it, but there's like, it's a very complex skit where they like, the camera moves back and forth. And as they like move back into the scene, they're like taking a milk jug and like dumping it on their friend and like tossing them onto a bed. So a bunch of crazy shit. And then I saw these white girls do the exact same skit, like verbatim same skit, no credit to the original creators. And I was like, yo, what the fuck? Like, what are you doing here? Come on. Like, I know what this is. Right. Yeah. And then she got upset because she was like, no, I just swear I came up with this idea on my own. And like, really, all the steps of like the milk, the bed, I think there's like pancakes involved. I'm like, there's no way you thought of all of the exact same props. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, people stealing other people's comedy routines online and stuff like that is always, like in comedy, for example, that's super frowned upon. In fact, like if you steal other people's bits, if you come up with one bit that's very similar to one other person, like, okay, you get some leeway on that. But when you're stealing multiple jokes, the way like Amy Schumer was found out, or you get like completely ostracized by the community. And so
Well, is that like career ending in comedy? Like, is Amy Schumer kind of fucked because of that?
I think like as far as the comedy community is gone, like yeah, she's pretty much ostracized. There's been a couple other ones like Carlos Mencia and others that Joe Rogan exposed as like a complete like comedy thief, and it can be a big thing. So depending on who you steal from and how prominent it is, like yeah, it can definitely be a big deal. So I like that. I think to bring it back to the original question in regards to the whole cultural appropriation thing, I haven't liked the ways in which I've seen it weaponized a lot of the times. Like I saw a white dude have dreads and like this black girl reamed him out in public, like for no. I'm like, bro, first off, dreads are not like indicative of your culture. That's retarded. And two, the way you're going about this is crazy. There's a conversation that can be had without you doing that. So
there's also multiple like Norwegian cultures that did like dreading and braiding all the time as well. So it's kind of definitely a cringe one. Okay, that looks like all the super chats. We did it. Awesome.
Well, listen, I'm glad we could have this conversation. And guys, you know what? If you're watching right now and you guys are appreciating this, she needs $20 to get a new mic, and she needs one. So make sure you roll them donos in. You feel me? Someone said, "Is the Harlem Shake cultural appropriation?" I don't know. I'm going to answer that one. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So
awesome.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I do a show called The Humanizing that a bunch of people have asked if I could do that show with you. I can give you more details if you're interested. It's delicious fifis the whole way through. I'm just kidding. But I do ask you a lot about your life. It's essentially, who are you, why are you, and how have you arrived at the views and values that you have based on your
I hate doing those kind of like, this is my life thing. I don't like doing that shit.
Okay.
Yeah. But we can do, if you want to chat about different things, we can certainly do that. So I'm more than happy.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
Peace.